Chapter 1103. The Dead Sun. Huaishi's movements were stiff for a long time, and he did not speak. The required items were sun's remains, eternal fire, seed of the abyss. The required condition was darkness of the realms. The required ritual was ignite hell, burn everything. In the end, he would be reborn from the boundless fire and light. This was the advancement required by East Lord, the peak of heaven's inquisition. In this regard, Tangi had already made a detailed explanation. Among them, sun's remains referred to the divine crystal left by the former sun god. Eternal fire was the source of eternal light from the scorching sun. Seed of the abyss was the essence and power from the ruler, and darkness of the realms, as the name implied, was the moment when the border of the present realm and hell lost their light. In the end, he ignited the entire hell and burned everything, including himself. From the collapsed hell, he would become a new sun that rose and shone with endless light. He would become East Lord. It should be said that this was an advancement that belonged to Huaishi alone, and it was more than one level higher than the requirements required for East Lord's advancement. Moreover, this was only a part of it. Among the names listed in the long list, none of them were easy to deal with. Sun's remains required him to find the divine crystal left behind by a sun god before he fell, but the problem was that most of the sun gods, as long as they had a name, were killed by someone who passed by many years ago, and not even a handful of ashes were left. The rest fell into the rancher's stomach. If he wanted to dig it out, he had to jump into the mouth of the destruction elemental and find it himself. Eternal fire, S requirement, was the most general. It required Huaishi to find an inextinguishable fire, an untainted light. Seed of the abyss, on the other hand, required Huaishi to kill at least one ruler with matching attributes. Then he had to dig out their solidified souls and authority from their corpses and make them into his own advancement materials before drying them. The most torturous thing was the prerequisite, darkness of the realms. As everyone knew, the sun was the projection of the pillar of the divine essence in the universe. If they wanted to plunge the entire reality, the border, and even hell into darkness, they would have to ask Huaishi to turn off this light. But this thing was not a switch placed next to the door, where anyone could just go and press it. Even if Huaishi managed to find the switch, who knew what kind of chaos it would cause the moment the spirit's essence pillar went offline? That was the foundation of the three great seals. Unless Huaishi had made up his mind to become a traitor in the dark, he would never consider it. One could only say that there was still a long way to go. The moment he received the list, Huaishi almost wanted to delete his account and stop playing. Fortunately, the most illusory requirement had been met by him first, the eternal inextinguishable flame, which referred to the eternal light. The flame had never been the focus. On the contrary, the light created by the fire was its essence. And Huaishi happened to have a set of Helios's miracle in his hands, as well as the ascension mystic instrument created by the Grand Master Publius. It pointed to his good brother, the Light King Balder, who was still at his beck and call even though he was already dead. At that time, Huaishi would be the Light King's mortal incarnation, holding his authority in his hands. The eternal light was not a problem at all. If the Continuation Academy could help solve the sun's remnant, then it was not impossible for him to work hard to fulfill the seed of the abyss. Anyway, couldn't he just call for help if he couldn't win? Recently, there was still the War of the Realms. Although it was not easy to find a ruler, it was better than finding a needle in a haystack in the vast abyss. As for the darkness of the realms, he could only hope that Tangi's estimation was correct. As everyone knew, for the Astronomy Society, destroying a world was as easy as eating and drinking. After every major adjustment and turmoil, such as the War of the Realms, the Astronomy Society would spend a huge amount of correction points to reconstruct the present realm. After the old world was disintegrated, the present realm would be reconstructed on this foundation, reinstalling the sea disk, or rather replacing it with a new one. The 15th World Destruction Plan and the World Creation Plan should already be in the process of preparation. At that time, the 3 Great Seals would definitely be temporarily closed, and the Spirit Marrow, Origin Substance, and Pillar of Change would also be offline. Huaishir might be able to hitch a ride and find an opportunity to advance. If that was the case, Huaishir might not have a headache. After all, as long as there was a path, he could just take it. Bumps and bumpy roads were better than no roads at all. But the key was that he had to take more than one path. At the same time, he needed to prepare for and accept the advancement at the same time. Not only did Yin Zhongjuan need to advance, but Great Seeming also needed to advance at the same time. Otherwise, he would not be able to achieve the embryonic form of Tai. In fact, he might even be devoured by his own deluxe version of Dongjun's advancement. In the original deduction and calculation, the key reason why everyone who advanced to Dongjun would become an artificial sun without any consciousness was that no matter how firm and tenacious a human soul, and they could not withstand such a violent and huge divine power. The miracle was too huge, and it would crush the soul of the ascendant. Now, Tongyi still dared to add more without any scruples. Other than letting Huaishir take the deluxe version of the advancement at the beginning, her biggest assurance came from the other sacred mark, Changxi, which was originally designed to assist Dongjun and prevent him from going out of control. She was named after the moon goddess. Compared to Dongjun's tyranny, she was the embodiment of mercy and peace. But in fact, just like the light of the moon was also reflected from the sun, these 2 sacred marks were 2 sides of the same coin. Changxi, an outsider that did not exist in Jyoga, was a control mechanism that Tongyi specially added in the Road of Heaven's Inquisition after countless failures. It was a buffer layer that was tailor-made for Dongjun. Its essence was the combination of the divinity of Shihi, who was known as the Sun Protector, and Chang'e, who was known as the Moon Mother. In the end, it formed a protection that was enough to protect the soul and will of the ascendant from being burned by the sun. Otherwise, once the advancement began, Huaishir would probably become the fuel of the sun, and he would not be able to achieve Dongjun. In order to form the embryonic form of Tai, Tongyi added more water to the noodles and water to the noodles. She was unwilling to reduce the ingredients, which directly led to the difficulty of Huaishir's advancement from nightmare level to nightmare level. Fortunately, she also knew that she could not get over her conscience and promised that Huaishir would not have to worry about Changxi's advancement. She would take care of it herself. Otherwise, he would probably only feel despair. And now, the Continuation Academy happened to place such a clue as the dead sun in front of Huaishir, which had already given him an irresistible reason. But can I ask something? He raised his hand curiously. Excuse me, who is the dead sun referring to? After all, as far as I know, the death of the sun god of the present realm is more, thorough. It's normal to be suspicious. After all, even the Continuation Academy can't determine its state now, 008 replied. The clue we have is the whereabouts of the sun god of the Indian lineage, Surya Tisk. Huaishir seemed to hear a certain someone's displeased voice. He pretended not to hear and continued to listen to 008. Hundreds of years ago, before the gods chose to unite, what was going on for a long time was a war of unity and authority. Many gods fell as a result. Among them, the most tragic fall was in the realm of the sun. Although Surya was not spared, due to Brahma's reminder, before he fell, he transferred his divinity and authority to another place in advance to prepare for his resurrection. However, the plan did not catch up with the changes. Due to the birth of the rancher, Surya's resurrection ritual was affected and interfered with. It was destined to fail, but it was not a complete failure. If I have to say, after the separation of consciousness, the sun god is now in a state of neither life nor death, 008 reminded him. If you want to find the remains of the sun, this will be your best chance. Other than that, I'm afraid there's only a pile of leftovers left to choose from in the whole realm. Hee, that dog, I said. I'm so pissed off. Those Indians are the same as their gods. None of them keep their words and do things reliably. They have 100,000 ways to run away and slack off. Huaishir could only pretend not to hear the resentful whispers of a certain black-hearted woman. After thinking for a moment, he could not help but ask, "Why do I feel that the Continuation Academy seems to want me to participate? Indeed, this will be the first step in our formal cooperation, won't it?" 008 did not hide, nor was he afraid that Huaishir would take the opportunity to raise the price. In addition, regarding your advancement, we will provide all the help we can in the future. However, now it seems that other things may not need to worry too much about unpopular characters, like us. To be honest, this is a bit overpriced. Huaishir rubbed his face and said helplessly, "As a tool, I still know what I'm capable of. You guys have come up with so many things, I'm a little scared, you understand? In terms of investment, some of us have already felt that such a strategy is too conservative." 008 was silent for a moment, and a trace of melancholy seemed to emerge in his dry, electronic voice. "Sir Huaishir, we are eager to witness the birth of a East King. After all, celestial genealogy is not the only one in this world who yearns for the return of the utopia, even if the behemoth of the past cannot return to its former height in a short period of time. This is not the reason why it must be missing. The absence of one of the three pillars is not a good thing for the Astronomical Society or for the present state." With that, 008 handed a gray invitation letter to Huaishir. "We will look forward to your reply." In this regard, Huaishir could only be silent. In the end, before leaving, 008 asked again, "Do you have any other questions?" "To be honest, there are a lot." Huaishir shrugged. "When to leave, when to come back, about what to do. You have to tell me something I can know, right?" 008 raised his hand and took out a thin book from the briefcase again. "This is an answer book specially prepared for you. It includes our schedule, the parts you need to be responsible for, and so on. This is really—" Huaishir's eyes twitched, and he could only say, "Well prepared. This is the style of the Continuing Academy." 008 replied indifferently. "Besides that, is there anything else?" Huaishir thought for a moment, and finally asked, "There is another question that has nothing to do with me. Please speak. Shangazumi, why did he agree to participate?" Huaishir asked, "What did you promise?" 008 seemed to be silent for a second, but it was so short that people couldn't tell. In the end, he replied, "We promised him a position in the plan, that's all. His purpose is the process itself." The messenger of the Continuing Academy said, "In the last stage of his life, Mr. Shangazumi wants a battle that can make him commit himself wholeheartedly like a swordsman and generously die. He wants a death that is worthy of the identity of the Sword Saint." In this way, the final answer was made. 008 took a step back and took a last look at Huaishir and the air behind Huaishir. He nodded slightly, as if saying goodbye. He turned and left. Soon, the figure carrying the briefcase disappeared behind the open door. Chapter 1104. It was the same as an illusion. Huaishir actually saw a trace of fatigue, like the gray-robed man from 008's back. Don't think about it. It's not the same person, although that guy isn't much better. Tangi emerged from the air, looking unhappy. After all, it's the dean. What the hell? Huaishir's legs went soft, and he almost sat on the ground. He looked back and forth in disbelief at the direction where Tongi and the figure left. Him, the dean? Should I say the dean, or the remnants of the dean? It's hard to say. Tongi took out a washed apple from her pocket and took 2 bites. The Continuation Institute is so mysterious. Even the dean is the same. Internal changes are never announced to the public, and internal results are never released to the public. Similarly, internal deaths are never known to the outside world. After implementing mysticism to the end, even the Continuation Institute itself doesn't know how many secrets it has, including who the hell is the dean. They don't even know who the dean is. Huaishir was puzzled. This was getting more and more ridiculous. If you're the boss, and you're always covered by a chemical suit and a gas mask, how many subordinates do you think will recognize you? Regardless, the one who is recognized by the Continuation Court is the dean himself. Do you think the Continuation Academy will call me dean? It can't talk. Tongi shook her head and replied indifferently. But I'm afraid it can do everything except talk, right? No, maybe it can really talk. After all, the artificial intelligence that communicates with the outside world has never said where it comes from. The Continuation Institute is alive. Huaishir was not referring to the organization and structure they formed, but the building itself. How could the existence that can block so many pollutants and distortion values be just 2 simple walls? It has its own will and will choose agents for itself. And the unlucky ones who are chosen will be tortured forever when they are alive, and will contribute their remaining heat when they die, without any peace. What you saw just now was the dean it chose. Perhaps it was a candidate, or perhaps it was a remnant of the previous dean. No matter what, that number is quite close to the front. She paused for a moment before concluding, the Continuation Academy values you, Huaishir, be it the organization or itself. But that is to be expected, since those who could not see your potential and ability are either idiots or blind. Aha! It's a little embarrassing for you to praise me like that. Huaishir scratched his head, shyly. I'm just praising the tool. What are you so proud of? Tongji rolled her eyes. In short, be prepared to be entangled with them in the future. Who knows what those guys are up to? Don't think that they're kind people. For those guys who only care about results, if you're useful enough, they'll even stuff the elemental of destruction into your stomach and lock you up like a prison. Huaishir froze for a long time. Now, it shouldn't be that bad, right? Don't worry. It shouldn't be that bad in the future, unless there's really no other way. Tongji said calmly. To them, a disposable tool or a permanent ATM, it's still clear which is more valuable. After all, once Russell succeeds in restoring the utopia, you'll definitely be the next master of the pedigree and the future king of the utopia. In a few decades, after that old bastard kicks the bucket, you might also be able to elect the next president. It's such a distant matter. Don't give me a shot of adrenaline, okay? Besides, Russell is only a little over 100 years old, and you're already calling him old. For some reason, Huaishir's movements suddenly stiffened. He tried hard to restrain the urge to twitch his face, and then abruptly changed the topic. So, should I go or not? Go. There's good stuff to get, so why not? Tongi glanced at him with a smile, as if she knew what he was going to say next, which made Huaishir's hair stand on end. Ahem, well, I feel that it'll be very dangerous. He tried hard to ignore the premonition of death that was close at hand and continued to ask, look, after all, the Continuation Institute also said that it's very dangerous, right? If we don't come back, won't we be used as a private vehicle and suffer a tragic loss? Oh, scared? Tongi laughed. Scared. Huaishir nodded frantically, not knowing what she was referring to. In short, very scared. It's natural to be scared, but don't worry. Tangi shook her head. When the Continuation Institute said that it's dangerous, it means that they're only 80% sure, so they're a little panicked. It's like a top student telling you that it's very difficult after the exam, but you can't do it anymore. There's definitely danger, but those guys are like the gods in some cheap novels. They never give experimental subjects tasks that exceed their abilities. So, as long as you work hard, there won't be any major problems. Hearing what she said and seeing that her expression was normal, Huaishir was relieved. However, after taking 2 steps, he remembered his discovery and couldn't help but be curious. Tangi, were you angry at that time? No. Tangi smiled and waved her hand. Don't worry, I won't be angry behind your back or anything. Ahem, I mean the sun god. Huaishir asked tentatively. Because of Celia? No. Tangi shook her head. That's good. Huaishir nodded and comforted her. Think on the bright side. If you didn't fail back then, wouldn't I be useless now? Right, I wouldn't. Tangi didn't say anything else. She looked at Huaishir in silence for a long time and told him word by word, I didn't. Okay, I got it. You didn't. Huaishir nodded hard. Obviously super. 2 days later, in the Foundry Center, Huaishir repeatedly confirmed that the assembly line was set up correctly and that there were no mistakes in the process. After confirming that the group of interns under his command had indeed figured out how to produce, he finally let out a sigh of relief. The process of creating alchemy was inseparable from the maintenance and care of alchemists, but the art of forging was much more convenient. The main thing was that there was a sufficient supply of origin substance and appropriate maintenance. Even if Huaishir left, it wouldn't affect the operation of the assembly line. After all, they were all relatively low-end products, so there was no need to put in much effort and process. He had already thrown all the work that belonged to him to Yuan as usual. He also didn't need to worry about the training hall. With the heir appointed by the Sword Saint presiding over things, the little cabin in the forest assisting from the side, and a professional badass like Hades, even if things didn't go well, it wouldn't be too bad. Huaishir only needed to use the name of celestial genealogy to support his students, and everything would be fine. As for Anna, she seemed to be frightened by the big sisters outside. In the past 2 days, she was very well behaved and didn't even cause any trouble. She even ate less. Huaishir could only leave a lot of homework as a comfort, hoping that she would get over the pain soon. After dealing with all the other matters without stopping, Huaishir sat at the table in the Stone Marrow Hall and looked at the thick book that the Continuation Academy had left for her. She also looked at the invitation letter in front of her. He hesitated, according to the Continuation Institute, if he was willing to accept the invitation. As long as he opened the invitation when he was ready to leave, they would receive the news. But just as Huaishir was about to open the invitation, he heard a knock on the door. The courier from yesterday's delivery waited with a smile. Every time it was this person, it always made Huaishir wonder if there were no other salespeople in their company. Please sign for it, Mr. Huaishir. It's right here. The courier pointed to the blank space in the document. After confirming that Huaishir had received the goods, he left without any sense of presence, leaving Huaishir and the cardboard box in front of him. It felt like there was a problem, especially when he saw the sender's name was Russell. The box was wrapped in layers, just like Russell's own bad taste. After 6 layers of dolls, there was only a small box left in his hand, which seemed to be able to hold a diamond ring. Huaishir couldn't help but feel a little scared. What if this old thing awakened some terrible hobby? Should he put righteousness before family, or should he put righteousness before family? It was really hard to choose. When he reluctantly opened it, he found that there was only a glass bead the size of a thumb inside. It was translucent and made of crystal, but the rough surface and the uncorrected edges and corners revealed the maker's carelessness and perfunctory work. "What the hell is this?" Huaisher picked it up and looked at it carefully. But in a trance, the thing in his hand disappeared without a trace. He couldn't see it anymore. It was like a bubble that evaporated in the sun. But when he looked up and looked around, he spontaneously felt a sense of fluttering and confusion, as if everything had changed subtly. But soon, this strange feeling disappeared without a trace. It wasn't until Huaisher rummaged through a pile of cardboard boxes for a long time that he realized that he had been fooled by Russell again. In desperation, he could only call and ask in person, "What did you send me?" Through the receiver, he could hear the faint melody of a record on the other end of the phone, as well as Russell's low humming, pleasant and relaxed. As if thinking for a moment, he replied, "Well, just treat it as a lie." "A lie?" Huaisher frowned. "Yes, a lie from Loki. As for the content of the lie, keep it a secret for the time being. Anyway, it's just a preparatory measure. Just forget about it." Russell replied calmly, "Compared to this, shouldn't you be setting off? Huaisher, don't let others wait too long. Don't let you miss out on fun." Huaisher rolled his eyes and hung up the phone. He didn't want to pay attention to this mysterious guy anymore. He tore up the invitation in his hand without hesitation. There was no door in the void. Neither did the earth shake or the mountains shake. In the blink of an eye, the world in front of him had changed drastically. The lush forest, the tall tower that reached into the sky, and even the familiar campus scene disappeared without a trace. Instead, it was replaced by a grayish-black enclosed space. Lights hung above the low dome, thick pillars, grayish-black ground, and a dark space that seemed to extend to the end of the world. And the most important thing was in front of him, the noble girl with a smile, her crimson dress fluttering in the air like blood. Finally, in her hand, there was a stone sword that was slashing straight at his head. "Hello, Huaisher," Liz Heckermott greeted him. Chapter 11:05. At that time, the sword was only 0.01 centimeters away from his forehead, but Huaisher knew that in the next second, the sword would hit nothing, because without thinking, he rolled and slid on the ground, instantly retreating a distance of more than a dozen steps. When he looked back, he sighed, "Do you Americans always greet each other in such a ridiculous way?" "Yes." Liz dragged the stone sword and moved forward. The dark red stone pieces rubbed against the ground, bursting into dazzling sparks. "This is a welcome ceremony specially prepared for you. Huaisher." "Wow, that's such an honor." Huaisher was so moved that he couldn't help but clap his hands. "I thought Americans greet people with cannons. Little Liz, are you so gentle?" Liz's movements paused for a moment, and the coldness above her eyes burst out like a cold wave. Just like when she beat up her cheap uncle, she gritted her teeth and could no longer restrain her anger. In an instant, she broke through the air. "Don't call me Little Liz." It was difficult to tell which of the 3 slashes came first or at the same time. The iron light crisscrossed. Huaisher wanted to dodge and retreat, but when he looked back, he found that after the iron light in front of him left the sword blade, it formed a solid outline. It was as agile as a living thing and flew towards Huaisher on its own. It even cooperated with Liz's sword blade to block all escape routes for Huaisher, forcing him to face it head-on. He had no choice but to pull out the sword of virtue. Block. Sparks flew. Huaisher was stunned. "Wow, are you serious? What makes you think that, after you sold me a bunch of junk, I should greet you with a smile?" "Huaisher." Liz took a step forward and resisted Huaisher's power. She looked down and said, "If you ask me, using a stone sword instead of a divine mark to greet you is already the best way to restrain yourself." Cough, cough. Everything can be discussed. Huaisher blinked innocently. "Well, Everyone knows that goods are naturally divided into different specifications. If you're not satisfied with the basic model, you can always pay for the upgraded version. At most, I'll give you a year's worth of furnace repair service for free, okay? By the way, if you join the free upgrade program now, you can exchange the old model for the next generation of foundry for a little bit of money. Don't you Americans like this? Speaking of that, he was no longer sleepy. He excitedly introduced, "Thanks to your sales strategy, we are now developing a cloud foundry center. Customers can submit their foundry blueprints to the large server that has just been built on the dark net for optimization and storage. Furthermore, they can also join our sharing plan. They can connect their foundry to the cloud, and all the foundry in the world will be divided into a part of the matrix to deal with the problem of large-scale border relics, benefiting the world. Oh, and if you join now, you can even get virtual coins that are priceless by participating in the forging process." After hearing that, Liz could not help but laugh. "Do I look like a fool who would pay for your work for free? You have to pay enough money first. I admit that I earned a little, but I can't be a mistress. Look at how generous the Eastern Xia Kingdom is. How can you monopolize it?" "That's right," Zhang Wuji said. Huaishe retorted, "Besides, everyone is for me, and I am for everyone. One for all. How can you call me a fool? Then I'll ask you to make a sacrifice first." Liz sneered. In the stone sword, the phantom of the jaguar roared silently, bursting out a high-pitched sword cry. "With your broken body, I offer it to the gods." The earth cracked, and endless blood spurted out from the cracks, falling down into the bottomless abyss below like a waterfall. This place had become a cruel altar in front of the gods. Now, holding the stone sword, the high priestess raised her eyes and looked at the sacrifice in front of her. There was nowhere to hide and no way to escape. "This time, I won't let you escape, bastard," she whispered coldly. "No matter what tricks you use, it won't work." It was an obsession that had lasted since they met in the village of Dusk. Hidden under their alliance, hidden under each other's understanding and recognition, was a determination that was deeper and even greater than that. "Today, between you and me, we must decide who is better." "Well, is it too late for me to surrender now?" Huaishe raised his hands subconsciously and begged without hesitation. "As long as you don't hit my face, you can have anything you want. You can even post an apology on Weibo. I'll write you 3,000 words, okay? It's not like we can't discuss the number of words. That kind of thing can wait until I offer your mouth to the corn god." Liz stepped forward indifferently. "Don't worry, I'll let you live. Or, if you beat me, won't the problem be solved too? Seriously, why are you being so calculative with a music teacher?" Huaishe scratched his head helplessly and sighed. "Thinking back, I was beaten up by you every time. Last time in the village of Dusk, didn't you also make a hole in me? Is winning or losing that important? Friendship comes first, competition comes second. Besides, we even danced." Before he finished speaking, he felt that he had poked a hole in the ground. No, it should be said that he had picked up the pot that should not have been picked up. Once again, Liz recalled the humiliating memories of being teased again, and her face became more and more ugly. "Think about it carefully. Don't let me live." She squeezed the words out from between her teeth. "A bastard like you should just die." The spirit of left hummingbird rose from the endless blood and looked down at everything on the blood-stained altar with a hideous smile, waiting for the sacrifice to be made. This Huaishe was stunned. He did not mind moving his body occasionally. Besides, who would not like to fight with a girl? However, he had just advanced not long ago, and he did not have time to get used to Yun Zhongjuan's strength. If he was not careful, wouldn't it be a major disaster? Or should he just grit his teeth and let her beat him up? Anyway, she would not kill him, right? But what if he was really beaten to death? How could he not tell that Liz had probably advanced a long time ago and was trying her best to get back at him? Just as his mind was wandering, Liz, who was getting more and more gloomy, could no longer tolerate the frivolity and arrogance of her opponent. The stone sword slashed down again, and when it slashed down from the air, it made a high-pitched sound as if it was rubbing against steel. Under the crack, the color of blood swirled and rose to the gloomy ceiling. The sharp blade was already inches away from Weischer's eyes. In the end, it stopped abruptly in front of two thick fingers. Phew, that was close. The old man who came late sighed softly. We almost had a diplomatic accident. The palm, which was as rough as tree bark, was full of wrinkles left by time. The skeleton, which should have shrunk after the flesh and blood died, had become terrifyingly huge. Just that hand alone was enough to cover Weischer's head and crush his dog's head. But now it was blocking his way. Between the two of them, a thin and stooped figure suddenly appeared, holding a curved iron staff in his hand. His broad bones supported his body like an old mountain range. The stone sword stopped abruptly. When the old man's left hand knocked on the iron staff, the crisp sound made the blood and the crack on the ground disappear without a trace. How disappointing, Liz! The old man with the feathered crown looked at his junior and couldn't help but shake his head and scold. I thought you sneaked out because you've finally grown up and wanted to find someone to confess to. But in the end, you're fighting. You're representing the American lineage, representing the inheritance of noble blood. Look, is this appropriate? Is this reasonable? The helplessness of being exasperated at his failure to live up to his expectations was simply overflowing with words. After a brief moment of astonishment, Liz could not help but squint at him. There was no respect. She suddenly asked, "How much did you bet with him?" "Of course I bet all in. What's the point of a small fight?" How could our Liz fight? The old man proudly raised his head and answered without hesitation. After noticing Liz's strange expression, he suddenly coughed twice. "Ahem, it doesn't matter how much you bet. What's important is that I think highly of you. Then I'll have to thank you." As if she had long been accustomed to the unreliability of her family's elders, Liz did not even have the interest to be angry. She just pulled out the stone sword from his hand. At this point, even if she wanted to hurry up and fight with Weischer, with this old man here, she was afraid that she could not fight anymore. After leaving an angry look that said, "Be careful next time," she did not talk nonsense and turned to leave. And the old man finally turned his head back with a smile. Because his old and stooped body was so huge, even if he was half-bent, his huge shadow still covered Weischer's face, bringing a mountain-like pressure. Weischer suppressed the urge to suck in a breath of cold air and squeezed out a smile. "How are you, old man?" It would be fine if he did not realize it at the beginning, but if he still could not recognize it now, he did not want to live anymore. The crowned person of the American lineage was now an important assistant of the feathered serpent and the inner elder of the American lineage, the world's giant, Teralt Cutley. "How is it? Kid, you heard what I said just now, right?" Teralt's old face suddenly grinned. He moved closer and revealed an expectant expression. "Kid, there are very few people in the whole realm with conditions like our Liz. Do you want to consider it?" Weischer's expression twitched. He subconsciously leaned back and wanted to remind Teralt, "The one you are talking about is not far away." There was only a roar that broke through the air. A stone-toothed sword flew over from the distant darkness and mercilessly slashed the old man's head. Sparks flew and almost fell on Weischer's face. Teralt reached out his hand indifferently and pulled out the stone-toothed sword that was wedged into the feathered crown. He glanced at him with a smile and turned back to encourage him before leaving. "Think about it carefully. I have high hopes for you." "Pa, the The second spear engraved with tiger stripes pierced his old face. After a spark jumped, he casually caught it in his hand. Why do young people nowadays like to fight so easily? Love and peace are the true meaning. Just like that, he sighed and knocked the iron staff down. Just like that, the old man disappeared on the spot without any warning. Only Huaishir was left alone in the empty and strange hall. When he looked around, he saw nut shells, melon seed skins, and popcorn shards all over the floor. His eyes could not help but twitch wildly. How many people were watching the live broadcast here just now? Just as he was scratching his head, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "It's time to go, Huaishir." When Huaishir turned around, he saw the man standing there. His expression seemed to be eternally serious. His tie and cuffs were meticulous, and there was not a single wrinkle on his grayish-black robe. The lines were so smooth that it moved one to tears. The ivory tower was always reliable, the pillar of celestial genealogy, the last conscience of utopia. Vice Principal. Huaishir was stunned. "When did you arrive?" "Just now." Isaac was silent for a few seconds, and his gaze drifted a little. "You were definitely here from the beginning. Let's not talk about these unimportant things. Follow me." Isaac took the initiative to walk in front, making Huaishir's heart turn cold. He's actually changing the topic. However, after this incident, there was nothing much to say. It was all an old score he had left behind in the past. How could he blame him for blocking the door? He followed behind the vice principal and stepped into a door that suddenly opened. However, behind the door was a narrow walkway, and beyond it was a cliff that was 10,000 feet high. In the deep darkness in the distance, there seemed to be a low roar. Countless huge modules descended or rose under the pull of chains and mechanisms, stirring up a cold wind. After passing through another door, they seemed to have come to a lawn under the sun. However, the sun seemed to have no temperature, and the scenery in the distance was too fleeting. It was like a bubble. "Where are we?" Huaishir asked. "The Continuation Institute." Isaac looked back at him and added, "It's not the peripheral institution you've been to, but the real headquarters of the Continuation Institute." He pushed open the door and walked into the spacious hall. It was like an afternoon tea party. Under the lazy and illusory sunlight, two ladies at a low table were talking about something. Sensing that they had walked in, they looked over at the same time. The one in front was about middle-aged. Her skin was slightly tanned, and there was a little red makeup on her forehead. There was no sign of gentleness in her demeanor, but her pair of golden eyes made people feel a sense of desolation and uneasiness. In her arms, she was holding a little monkey that was eating peanuts. It was raising its paw, trying to pull its master's golden hair ornament. "Don't be rude." Isaac reminded in a low voice, "That's Nanin's mother of India's destruction lineage. In her arms is the living miracle, Hanuman." "Don't say it like I'm a grumpy old lady." "Isaac." Nanin's mother shook her head slightly. She glanced at Huaishir and nodded as if she was praising him. Beside her, the old lady who didn't hide her age couldn't help but laugh. "It's rare to see you so reserved." "Huaishir," the old man with short silver hair asked jokingly, "What's wrong? You don't even greet me. When you see me—" When Huaishir finally looked over, he didn't dare to speak. He no longer cared about the demeanor of a navigator and the bearing of the disaster sword. He quickly lowered his head and saluted respectfully. "Emperor Qing." Chapter 1106. "Huaishir, you still look like you can't straighten your back after taking advantage of me." The old lady didn't seem to care about Huaishir's politeness and awe. Instead, she shook her head and said, "If you don't have a thick skin, it will be difficult for you to achieve anything in the future." Whether I have a thick skin or not has nothing to do with whether I respect others or not. Huaishir replied indifferently, I'm just grateful for your help. Ha ha, you're still so good at talking. You make me feel happy. I'll take it that you like to cast a long line to catch a big fish. Emperor Qing smiled happily, no longer showing his usual arrogant and indifferent look. Instead, he pointed to the seat next to him and said, Since you've come at the right time, would you like to chat with this old woman for a while? Huaishir was about to decline when Isaac took the initiative to say, Sorry, I have something else to discuss with Huaishir. Next time then. The old lady waved her hand heartily. I won't force you to participate in the afternoon tea party of us old people. The two old seniors were very gentle and didn't have the idea of showing off their master's demeanor to the young people. However, the monkey took advantage of Huaishir's inattention to pull his hair and went back while squeaking. It was very proud. With his mother beside him, Huaishir didn't dare to pick up the damn monkey and beat it up. He could only nod politely and say goodbye. After going upstairs and sitting down in Isaac's suite, the vice president brought over a glass of wine. After sitting down and pondering for a moment, he asked, Did the president say anything to you before you came? It's as good as not saying anything. Huaishir shrugged and asked, So, can you tell me first, what's the matter? Where are the enemies? How many should I kill? I don't know. Isaac shook his head. After taking a sip of whiskey, he sighed with some worry and said, I'm afraid the Continuation Institute will have a lot to do. Don't you have any tips? Huaishir curiously leaned forward from the sofa and winked at him. She was just short of saying, Hurry up and take a look at the future, then come back and give me a spoiler, on her face. Isaac was silent for a long time, perfectly concealing the awkwardness of being targeted. There's too much noise on the timeline. I'm afraid the Continuation Academy won't give others such a chance. Everyone said that every edition was a god, but there were not many who were targeted like him in every edition. Take a bug like Kronos, for example. Everyone would take a stab at him when they had nothing to do. But after so many years, he was still a bug, and the only thing missing was to write a ban on his face. It couldn't be helped. As long as it was a one-on-one battle, the vice principal would always be a god. Strong crowd control and strong output. If he couldn't win, he would even block. The other side had no chance at all. If it was a group battle, then everyone would have to think of a way to ban the character. Otherwise, there would be no gaming experience at all. There was no surprise that the Continuation Academy would make the first move. What they had here, there would definitely be something in hell as well. If things turned into two time manipulators playing with each other, then it would only become an endless loop without any value, and it wouldn't benefit the outcome. But even so, the vice principal still came here as a representative of celestial genealogy, which meant that he still had value in other aspects. Putting aside the role of a sublimator as a tool, a person like him who was a top scholar in over 40 subjects would always be an indispensable part of the decision-making process. I'm afraid you won't directly participate in this battle, right? Huaishir asked. It's hard to say. The mysticism of the Continuation Academy is always unpredictable. Isaac rubbed his eyes tiredly. It was obvious that he had inquired about and come into contact with such matters these days. It was a pity that he didn't have Russell's ability to wield influence, and there was nothing he could do about the deep-rooted secrecy system of the Continuation Academy. Huaishir shook his head and leaned on the sofa. They didn't even let me bring Nautilus. To be honest, I'm a little guilty. Think on the bright side. If the Continuation Academy doesn't let you bring it, it means they don't need it. The vice principal shook his head and raised his finger. Suddenly, several iron boxes were smashed next to Huaishir. Take these with you. He waved his hand, and the iron boxes opened, revealing the densely packed relics of the border. The sudden burst of light almost blinded Huaishi's eyes. 2 gray gloves as thin as cicadas' wings were the indestructible hand, a relic of the border from the ivory tower's storage. It was claimed that as long as the other parts were not burned to ashes, it could even touch the core of a star. On both sides were the ring of longevity and the wings of blessing of death and decay. One of the 2 rings gave the wearer an additional 60% of vitality, regardless of the ratio, while the other was a miraculous treasure claimed to be able to defend against all curses and protect the soul. And in the middle of the ring was a huge 5-colored diamond. Huaishi sucked in a cold breath. The legendary mark of miracle, Rainbow Eye, it remembered the wearer's best state. Once activated, it could directly backtrack the wearer to the save point 6 times. Below it was an entire row of the most powerful single-soldier lethal weapons that the Directorate of Command's technical department had sealed off for Beelzebub, numbered curse bullets. There were 8 bullets with sequences above 3,000, 1 with sequences above 800, and 1 with sequences within the top 100. Just these few items added together were already the Ivory Tower's most prized possession, not to mention a full 1,000 milliliters of liquid source. It was enough for Huaishi to have enough power to bombard at full power for more than 10 minutes. Mr. Isaac, you didn't secretly move the school's secret storage, did you? Huaishi scratched his head. As the vice principal's secretary, he had never approved the withdrawal of these things. No, there were some things he had not even seen in the list. Isaac shook his head calmly. Don't worry. I only took what was within my authority. The rest are my personal and family collections. If you haven't used them all, remember to return them to me. This is a little too much, isn't it? Huaishi felt a little dizzy. It's just a precaution. Isaac was silent for a long time before telling him directly, I understand your style, but I hope you don't do too many unnecessary things, Mr. Huaishi. He paused and emphasized seriously, also listen to all instructions, understand? Huaishi was stunned. Maybe Mr. Russell has other considerations. I might have done something unnecessary. He looked down at the ice hockey on the table and sighed softly. But you have to understand, you are the future of celestial genealogy. You shouldn't be so careless. From the beginning, he had expressed his opposition to Huaishi participating in this plan. But just like in the past, his opposition would not work. When Kronos could not see the future that belonged to him clearly, the uneasiness hidden in his heart shook the 10,000-year-cold vice-chancellor. Was it really necessary to gamble so extravagantly? Could there really be so-called eternal victory at the gambling table? He did not know what Russell was thinking, but out of his trust in Russell, he did not question his judgment. Still, that did not stop him from doing what he could to prevent and remedy it. Protection for the future. Thank you, Mr. Isaac. I'll use them well. After a brief silence, Huaishi did not refuse Isaac's kindness and raised his hand to put them into the ultimate. Still, after several hesitations, he finally said, if the future only exists in a greenhouse, that kind of overly fragile and delicate thing is not what everyone wants, is it? Isaac said nothing, but outside the door, there was a teasing laugh. Things like the future have to be there first, but as long as there is, it won't be too bad. After the door was pushed open, a cheerful face poked out. So, apart from miracles, the legacy of the Divine Marrow Road is only doting, seeing the younger generation shining on the battlefield. Isaac's mother's heart would be drunk even if she did not say it. Perhaps she would be so moved that she would quietly wipe away her tears, right? The vice principal's expression froze and frowned slightly, but he did not get angry or scolded. Instead, he glanced helplessly at the newcomer and left his sight. He could not be bothered to argue. The first thing he saw was the tattoos that extended from beneath the leather jacket to her wrists and neck, thorn skulls, hearts, and profanities. Her pretty cheeks were smeared with smoky makeup, while her slender eyes and eyeliner were as sharp as knives. She swaggered in like a rider who had just returned from a motorcycle ride. After throwing her backpack on the table, she sat down beside Huai Shi and patted him on the shoulder. She didn't hide her praise at all. "You did a good job on the return trip, kid. If you want to get rid of Russell in the future, I will definitely vote for you in the Academic Affairs Office." "Really?" Huai Shi was overjoyed. It was not clear whether he was happy to be praised or to hear that he had gotten rid of Russell and got a guarantee to get rid of him. "Madam Chen," Isaac sighed helplessly. "As a teaching staff, at least set an example for the younger generation. Also, Mr. Russell is the principal after all. Can you pay more attention to this kind of topic?" "Okay, just kidding, but the voting is true." Madam Chen grinned and took out a wine pot from her pocket. "Do you want some?" A wisp of alcohol flowed out from the gap she opened. It did not have the sweetness of wine. Instead, it was pungent like fuel. With just a sniff, Huai Shi felt as if his lungs were on fire. Even without the toxicity, something that could make Yun Zhongjuan cough was definitely not something that humans could drink. Next to him, Madam Chen had already gulped down the bottle of liquid explosives. He did not know where the wine pot came from, but it was a relic from the border. The whole room was filled with the irritable and explosive smell, making it hard to breathe. Huai Shi could only obediently serve alcohol and cigarettes to her senior in the midst of her shock. Speaking of which, this was the first time he had met this lady. Madam Chen. Her real name was unknown, and she had never said it before. It was said that she was born in a family, but because of her choice to abandon her family name, the only thing that was known was the login name in the internal system. As one of the people in charge of the Hell branch of the Ivory Tower, in terms of position, she was also one of the executive vice principals of the school. At the same time, she was also a Tier 4 sublimator of the Eternal Road. Unlike Raymond, who had just advanced to a worker with a blank set of equipment, she was the Judgment Scale Anubis, who had been equipped with a full set of godly equipment for many years. She was a destroyer with all her specialties in war. She was an out-and-out humanoid weapon, and could be said to be one of the strongest combat forces of the Ivory Tower in Hell. Relying only on herself, without any support or logistics, she had forcefully wiped out the entire Hell and opened up a branch base for the Ivory Tower. She had maintained it for so many years. The Hell creatures that were annihilated by her every year could not only meet the research and development needs of the Ivory Tower, but she also had the spare energy to sell them to the outside world. The amount of money generated was not only enough to meet the daily expenses of the branch, but also to save up all kinds of top equipment with astronomical figures. Encountering such a big shot, Huai Shi only wanted to hug her thigh tightly and build a good relationship with her. When everyone was done drinking, they would go to Hell together to kill a few rulers. At that time, everyone would split the harvest and help him accumulate the seed of the abyss. Wouldn't that be great? He really liked this big sister who could lead the team. After a round of drinking happily with Huai Shi, Madam Chen seemed to have noticed Isaac, who was ignored by her. She looked around the room and asked, "It seems that this time, the three of us will team up and fight?" Russell really put in a lot of effort. Not only that, Isaac rubbed his forehead with a headache, sighed, and finally said truthfully, "Only the two of you are in charge of the battle. My main duty is to be responsible for listening to the command of Mr. Marcus, the former diplomat of the Republic, the uncle of the Roman Emperor, the old man who had been recuperating in the Ivory Tower for a long time, compared to us guys who run errands. I'm afraid he's the real protagonist this time, right?" At the same time, in the Command Bureau, accompanied by Jaeger, Russell finally saw his old friend again. He was in a wheelchair, dressed in a formal dress, and his white hair was meticulously tied up behind his head. As in previous years, he was gentle and elegant. However, after a long time, his face was already wrinkled and weathered. His eyes were turbid, as if he was distracted, staring blankly at the distant air. He didn't respond to the two visitors. "Mr. Marcus? Hello. May I ask if you still remember me? Did I take your linguistics class back then?" Jaeger greeted him for a long time, but he still didn't get a reply. In the end, he couldn't help but reach out and wave in front of his eyes. It only attracted a dull glance from the old man. Saliva dripped from the corner of his mouth. Jaeger frowned and looked at 002, who wasn't far away. Since the Continuation Institute needs him, why don't they treat him? Mr. Marcus refused. 002 replied indifferently. "A diplomat needs a clear mind and independent judgment. We can't take away one for the other. Besides, there is a problem that needs treatment. After examination, I don't think such a situation will hinder Mr. Marcus's performance." Okay. Jaeger restrained the urge to scratch his head, and his face was blank and dull. "In other words, we have to place an unprecedented bet on an Alzheimer's patient who is about to forget who he is after getting old." He paused for a long time and sighed, helplessly. "To be honest, I'm a little lacking in confidence. Except for him, the Astronomy Society has no other choice. When the covenant was signed, he was the only one who still exists, and only he can represent the agreement between heaven and hell." Russell took out his handkerchief and wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth for his old friend. "It doesn't matter who he is, as long as he still remembers what he has to do." He paused, bent down, squatted in front of his old friend, and asked solemnly, "My friend, can you do your duty?" In the wheelchair, the old man's eyes moved slightly and looked at him. It was as if he had just woken up from a dream. "Russell? Yes, it's me." Russell nodded. "Are you okay?" "Just a little." Marcus thought for a moment and shook his head. "Sleepy." "That's normal." Russell said, "Marcus, you're old and sleepy every day. From one dream to another, you can't tell whether you're awake or not." He asked softly, "But can you still defend the rights and interests of the present realm and ensure that the glory of the utopia doesn't fall?" At that moment, he saw the corners of the old man's mouth curl up slightly. It was as if he was happy. He glanced at him. Just like a long time ago, he was in high spirits. "Is the work about to start, Russell?" He murmured softly, as if he was talking in his sleep. "Yes, the heavy responsibility is in your hands again." Russell nodded. "Are you ready to face your enemy?" Thus, in the wheelchair, the dull old man once again revealed the heroic smile of the past. "A mere diplomatic mission is nothing." Chapter 1107. The sky was shrouded in gray mist, and the smell of sulfur filled the hot wind. At the end of the sky, there were countless flashes of light falling from the sky. Those iron pieces that were soaked in the sediment of hell fell from the sky like meteors. The rain never stopped falling into the cracked wasteland. Just like the endless sea that East Sia defended, this was the deep manifestation of the Russian Federation that included countless borders, the Iron Rain wasteland. The boundless land that was once endless, enough for the mechanical border to roam freely, was now dyed red with pitch-black scorch marks and blood. When the defense line of the various worlds expanded and covered a total of 30 depths, this endless wasteland also expanded below the depths. It turned into a battlefield. Countless large groups, frozen beings, hell creatures, and even the palaces of rulers descended here, bringing war, destruction, and even the most insignificant killing. At the most dangerous time, Even the fourth layer of defense was broken through, and the edge of the reality was touched, and when it reversed, the mighty torrent once again flattened the tides of hell, pushing everything from the abyss back into the abyss. It was as if the endless war was here, in the endless sea, in the country of fog that covered the border of America, in the fiery domain of the Middle East, in the endless crypts under the endless depths of Rome, in the labyrinth of India, in the sky domain of Egypt. This was the real war of the worlds, the battle between the reality and hell, between humans and the abyss. And today, on this day, all the storms came to a strange stop. Just as everyone was uneasy and vigilant, countless large groups and legions from hell returned to their fortresses and palaces. Everything was calm, until the moment the gate of the reality opened. The abyss surged like a tide, and countless eyes were cast at the group of figures that descended on the wasteland. And the old man in a wheelchair, pushed by Russell, was at the front of the line. He lowered his head, holding the former contract in his hand. He was drowsy. Step by step, he approached the deepest part of hell, the domain shrouded in eternal lightning. It's been many years since I've seen such a spectacular scene. At the front of the border defense line, the white-haired feathered serpent was smoking a cigar as he said softly, "His mere arrival has caused all the kings to pay their respects, and even the abyss to open up a path. Even the master of the lineage can only be reduced to a foil." Beside him, Xian Niao nodded. In merely 100 years, he was able to establish such great achievements. How can such an existence not be revered? The feathered serpent was slightly dumbfounded and laughed. "I thought the Eastern Summer people would say that I can replace him." "That's the theory, but it depends on the timing." Xian Niao replied indifferently, "The way of the world is unfair. Why don't you become a rebel and a traitor? You bet your 7 feet body and take the supreme merit of the universe. But if the world is peaceful, why bother to disturb Taiping for the sake of your own ambitions?" He thought for a moment and finally sighed. "The world is very good now." "That's right." The feathered serpent sighed. Even the master of the pedigree would sigh with emotion at the past glory of utopia and the present magnificence of the Astronomical Association when witnessing such a scene. No matter how open-minded they were, who wouldn't be envious? Ambitious people wouldn't reject power, and ascendants wouldn't reject miracles. Who could resist the temptation of controlling the world, be it the feathered serpent, Xian Niao, or the Russian Federation's Pope, who had been silent from the beginning to the end? None of them hid their emotions. After so many years, everyone was so familiar with each other. There was no need to be secretive and be jealous together. To be able to become the masters of the pedigree, they had experienced countless hardships and established countless miracles. Their pioneering work, their ability, and talent were all witnessed by everyone. There was no falsehood in this. But why can't the person who established such a peerless achievement be me? However, although they were jealous, they would only be jealous for a moment. Indeed, the world was peaceful, and there was no place for heroes to use their martial arts. It was the most tragic. If it weren't for the chaotic situation and the precarious situation, why would there be heroes born from blood and tears? If the Astronomical Association collapsed, even if there was a chance to create another peerless achievement, what was the point of winning after sacrificing so much and losing so many fellow soldiers and companions? Just like that, under the gaze of the present realm and hell, the group slowly moved forward. Finally, they came to the front of the border, the boundary of the abyss. On one side of the border, 3 masters of the pedigree stood. On the other side, in the heavy darkness, several huge silhouettes slowly emerged, quietly waiting. The wheelchair came to the front of the border. The sleepy old man seemed to wake up. He raised his head and looked at the people behind him. "Thank you for your trouble." No one spoke. They just nodded silently, expressing their admiration and blessings. Work is about to start again. Just like that, Marcus sighed softly. He raised his skinny arms and pushed the wheelchair with all his might. He crossed the border and walked into hell. In the darkness, a skeletal face that looked like a huge goat's head slowly emerged. Pale flames burned in the eye sockets. He recognized the man in front of him. "Mr. Marcus, I've been waiting for a long time." The messenger from the Thunder Sea said, "The door of my master's palace has been opened for you." "Then please give me a push." Marcus smiled and patted the wheelchair. "I can't walk anymore." "It's my duty." The goat-headed messenger stretched out his withered claws and took over Russell's work. He pushed him and walked towards hell. Behind him, the huge silhouette in the darkness also moved. When the footsteps stepped down, there was a loud noise like a landslide. Just like that, they gradually went away. It was as if a special path was prepared for him. In just a short time, the endless scenes in the darkness changed. They crossed the barren mountains, the crimson river, the strange maze, and the countless manifestations of hell. They came under the endless dark clouds. Thunder coiled above the sky, like countless wings fluttering, swimming, and illuminating the towering city in front of them, and the long and narrow door towering into the clouds. Under the guards of the giants, on the city wall, countless gazes looked down. They had already gone deep into hell and came before the ruler's royal carriage. What they saw along the way was a solemn scene. There was no noise in the empty palace. The tiny wheelchair and the messenger were as insignificant as dust in front of the building built by the giants. The messenger respectfully pushed the wheelchair forward until they reached the endless jade steps in front of the palace flickering with lightning. "This one will send you here." The goat-headed messenger clasped his chest and withdrew. "My king is waiting in the hall." Just like that, he quietly retreated, leaving the white jade steps leading to the dark summit and the old man in the wheelchair. Marcus slowly raised his head until he reached his limit and once again saw the palace in his memory. After so many years, it was still so majestic and cruel. It never showed any mercy to the weak, but the strong decided the meaning of everything and the way of existence. The throne of the Thunder Sea Grand Monarch, the strongest in the world. The weak would not be able to witness such an enormous majesty, and even approaching it would be a sin for them. Now, he needed to rely on his own strength to cross this final journey. But after thinking about it again, Marcus couldn't help but sigh again. He chose to give up. "I can't go up," he asked helplessly. "Can't someone help me?" Silence. For a long time, no one responded. In the end, as if someone was sighing helplessly, they stretched out their hand. Above the thunderclouds, a huge shadow and outline quickly emerged, turning into a huge hand that seemed to tear the whole hell apart. It stretched out and gently pinched the wheelchair and the old man in it, lifting him up. After a long period of danger and difficulty, he was sent to the door of the palace, ascending to heaven in a single step. Now, in order to make it convenient for him, even the threshold was removed, allowing him to calmly push the wheelchair straight in. Then he saw in the palace, under the heavy curtains, a figure squatting at the end of a gorgeous short table, holding his chin in boredom. In terms of pure destruction, and power, in terms of pure self-power, he deserved to be called the strongest in the abyss. Countless people recognized him. Countless people revered him and submitted to him, the eternal overlord of the Thunder Sea, the ruler of rulers, the king of kings. Thunder Grand Monarch. He didn't have a huge body and height like other giants. When he sat next to the short table specially prepared for guests, his body was less than 2 meters tall, even shorter than a newborn dwarf giant. No matter who looked at him, they would think that he was a handsome and tough man. His upper body was naked, and his arms and chest were engraved with ancient totems. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his short hair was like needles. His eyes seemed to be cast in gold, shining and majestic. Was this specially prepared for me? Marcus looked around at the large and small furnishings and couldn't help but laugh. It's really flattering, Grand Lord. As if bored, the Grand Lord raised his hand, casually picked up the fruits from the realm, and threw them into his mouth. I wanted to embarrass you on purpose. I know. Marcus nodded. I have experienced the necessary etiquette for an audience with the Grand Lord. But why do you have to help me this time? Because you are old, Marcus. The Grand Lord looked at the old friend in front of him, and it was unknown whether his expression was lament or pity. Look, I haven't seen you in such a short time, and your body has become so decayed, pitiful in your twilight years, like iron that has melted in time. Despite this, only your soul is still so beautiful and enchanting. Haha, enchanting? I don't think so. The corners of Marcus' mouth curled up. Slightly, maybe your taste is strange, Grand Lord. For hell, is there a treasure better than such a soul? The Grand Lord shook his head and told him patiently, My promise remains unchanged, Marcus. If you come under my command, I will give you the position of ruler. When you experience the eternal joy of hell in my palace, you will understand how ephemeral and fragile everything you love is. Marcus nodded slightly. That's really tempting. But you want to refuse, right? The Grand Lord shook his head indifferently. I don't mind your refusal or anger, but you can think about it. Forget it, Your Majesty. Marcus shook his head, ignoring the vicious gazes of the rulers on both sides, and replied with a smile, My dream is very beautiful. What you give me can't compare to it. Dead silence. In a brief moment of dead silence, the shoulders of the Grand Lord sitting at the end of the short table trembled slightly, and the whole sea of thunder reverberated with earth-shattering thunder. Like the laughter of the Grand Lord, a terrifying roar reverberated. It ravaged everyone's eardrums. Which side of us is the real hell, Marcus? The senior lord laughed, leaning forward and backward. Which side of us is the crazy one? If there is not enough madness, how can there be the determination to fight hell? Marcus replied calmly, Be crazy over there, keep your modesty and pride, and love what you love, Marcus. Only you have the privileges I promised, so you can be called a soul that I recognize. The Grand Lord nodded, and no longer tried to retain the treasure that did not belong to him. Instead, he raised his head and asked, So, Marcus, as the emissary of my enemy, why have you come? The remains of the old world, Marcus replied bluntly. Grand Lord, today I want to take back the fragments of Gaia. Chapter 1108. Once he said that, not only the Grand Lord in front of Marcus, but also the rulers prostrating respectfully on both sides of the throne, and even those behind the heavy curtains cast strange gazes at him. Even the lightning flashing in the sky seemed to stagnate for a moment. Everything was silent. Only the diplomat in the wheelchair looked at his enemy, the remains of the old world, the fragments of Gaia. That was the remnant from destruction, essential old Gaia. In fact, if one looked at it as a whole, it might not be appropriate to call it Gaia, and it might be a bit exaggerated to call it the world. That was just a name. It pointed to the world that wanted to destroy humans. In this era of humans, the first-generation world was completely destroyed by the Astronomy Club. This was indeed a helpless move. After all, before that, no one would have thought that there would be something like will in the world. But after losing all the walls formed by the gods, under the radiation of the abyss, the present realm began to gradually distort, gradually breeding malice and hostility against the descendants. Floods and monstrous waves, storms and droughts, lava and raging fire, meteorites falling from the sky and barren land, a strange fog that swallowed everything, and even the darkness that rapidly grew under the crypt. This was the origin of the endless sea, the country of fog, the Iron Rain wilderness, the Hellfire domain, and all the other borders. Before Gaia was destroyed, it was enough to shake the entire world, destroy all civilizations, and kill all humans, just like the mother who killed her children. When the butcher's knife was raised, what else could the children do but cry? Only the two relied on each other to survive above the abyss formed by the infinite depth. And when one of them deviated from this, everything was pushed to the edge of a precarious cliff. There was only one choice left. If the world wanted to destroy humans, then it had to destroy the world first. If the opponent was too threatening and had to be killed, but at the same time was too important and had to be preserved, then there was only one way left: harmlessness. The first world destruction plan and the world creation plan were the miracles of the Pioneer Society's transformation into the Astronomy Club. Driven by the power of the entire realm, the miracles were completed by humans. The old world was disintegrated, separated, rebuilt, and then recombined to form a new world. Artificially simulating the cycle of hell, the present realm was reborn. The direct result of this was that the world that wanted to kill humans no longer existed. With the appearance of the three great seals, a brand new world was formed. The present realm, the border, and hell formed a new cycle. As for the old world, it was completely dead. Countless fragments sank into the endless abyss of darkness. The love that had already disappeared, the hatred that could not disappear, the sorrow of being killed by a descendant, the despair of wanting to kill a descendant, and even the eternal pain. Perhaps there were still some vital essences, but that was no longer important to the present situation at that time. And now, Marcus was once again bringing up the past. After arriving at the core of the Sea of Lightning, he faced one of the few people who stood at the very top of the abyss and made his request. "Did I make myself clear? Grand Monarch," he asked. "It's clear and straightforward. There's no room for misunderstanding." The great dark monarch nodded and studied his appearance, a subtle expression appearing on his human-like face. "Then why didn't you respond to me?" Marcus asked, "Is my sincerity not enough? Or is my visit too abrupt? If you want to follow the old rules, you can throw me down from here and let these old bones of mine climb up from below. Then I'll say the same thing to you again." "I'm just waiting." The great dark monarch shook his head regretfully. "I hope you can hesitate a little or think more about your intentions. Friendship is hard to come by, Marcus. For the sake of the courtesy and respect you once showed me, you still have a chance to take back those words." "But I've never been the only one who came here, have I?" The diplomat ignored his good intentions and was aggressive, completely ignoring the good intentions of the Supreme. The pair of turbid eyes also widened, showing a solemn expression, and hoarsely declared, "I represent the present realm, the Astronomical Society, the combination of all the glory and meaning of this world. I am your enemy, Grand Monarch. Why do you despise me so much?" When he began to speak, the voice was no longer that of an old man. In the hoarse voice, there was a will harder than iron and hotter than the sun emerging. He asked solemnly, "Am I not strong enough to be your enemy?" In the silence, only the squatting man across the short table sighed, silently. He turned around and walked towards the darkness behind him, towards the throne that was so huge that it seemed to occupy the world. With every step he took, the robust body grew larger, and the thunder in the sky also played a roar. It was as if a giant was trampling on the earth, causing everything to wail. In the end, the throne that broke through the top of the hall and penetrated deep into the thunderclouds once again emerged a huge figure, that could fill the whole world. In that case, I can only respond to you directly, Marcus. A pair of dazzling golden eyes appeared on the dark giant's face. It looked down, no longer concealing the coldness and cruelty of a ruler. The thing you want, the remains you want, is in my hands. Indeed, the dead present realm is useless to me, tasteless to eat, and a pity to throw away, but it is my collection after all. Even among the treasures in the Sea of Thunder, it is enough to rank in the top 5. Why should I give it to you? In the whistling wind and loud noise on the wheelchair, the old man raised his skinny arms, supported his body with difficulty, and looked up at the king of hell in front of him. Then why don't we make a bet? How about it? He said, in the name of the contract maker, I want to restart the last bet between us, between the present realm and hell. As early as when the Astronomy Society was just established, the surge of the deep tide triggered the first war of worlds in human history. After losing the Wall of Gods, and after Gaia was killed, the present realm was unprotected. In hell, illuminated by the light of the present realm, the huge sleeping existences woke up with the surge of the deep tide. They looked at the world above their heads. Hunger rumbled. This was a phenomenon that evolved from the cycle of birth and death from the abyss. When a world ushered in the end, the remnants of the past era would once again take everything away, destroy everything, and completely push everything that remained into nothingness. This was like a feast. When the huge present realm fell into the abyss, countless fragments turned into countless hells, and a brand new king of hell would rise from the abyss, until a long time later, in the eternal darkness and hell, the miracle of a new world was born again. At that time, when the Astronomy Society was just established, the present realm fell into a weak and declining state. In the face of the War of Worlds, what they fought for with all their strength was a bet. The present realm and hell would make 3 bets. In the first time, the outcome of the War of Worlds was decided, and thus they were able to survive the most difficult period. In the second time, both sides won and lost, but it laid the foundation of the Silver Sea. At the same time, it also created the blueprint of the fourth plan, Kingdom of Heaven. And when the Third War of Worlds came, Marcus, who was once a diplomat and representative of the Astronomy Society, once again exercised the rights he had, restarting the contract between the present realm and hell, the last bet, taking back the remains of the old world. Oh, in that short silence, not only on the throne, but even behind the surrounding curtains, the unknown existences who came to watch inevitably made a slight disturbance. Some were surprised, some were contemptuous, and some were excited, but among them, none of them expressed rejection. As one of the participants last time, one of the 6 people who witnessed the contract, you do have such rights. The Grand Lord lowered his eyes and looked down at the opponent in front of him. His finger flicked in disdain. But do you have a bet that is enough to move us? Of course. Marcus replied indifferently. He raised his hand and held the contract that had been written long ago. With the present realm's defense line and its associated 30 layers of domains as the chip, on the old face there was a mocking flame in his eyes. If you can win, you can take it all. In that case, shall we make a final bet? Mathers? After a short moment of shock, the Grand Lord couldn't help but sneer. After losing your city wall, how do you plan to fight? In the last war, did we have something like a city wall? Marcus raised his head and asked, why don't you say a word? Everyone, such a bet is right in front of you. Are you going to hide behind the scenes like rats? Wither King, Paradise Earth Officiator, Jesters, Eternal World Group, Mother of Stone, Gloomy Eye, and everyone from Golden Dawn. Are you going to keep silent and stay out of this? Following the old man's roar and questioning, behind the layers of curtains, silhouettes slowly appeared one after another. They coldly glanced at the dust in the field. Ha ha, interesting. The Wither King, who was sitting on the blood-colored throne with a wine cup in his hand, happily knocked on the armrest. Since there is such a grand bet, how can I not participate? Mortal, you should be careful with your words. The Paradise Earth officiator, who was wearing a golden mask, indifferently warned, your end and your perfect future are all in the mouth of our God. Aya, look at this person. How embarrassing. Sitting on the high chair, Marcus took off his hat and shrugged helplessly. In any case, we used to be old friends. Why do you have to be so merciless? Our Lord has already set his eyes on you. The jesters replied dully, you can perform to your heart's content. If the profits are enough, I don't mind participating. The owner of the Eternal World Group, Workshop Master No. 1, said indifferently, I am not interested. A vague voice came from the Mother of Stone, who was like a giant statue. Do as you wish. Following the appearance of the rulers, it was as if the weight of the entire hell had gradually descended on this place. In the end, in the long silence, the giant lord, who was sitting on the throne, casually flicked his finger. Not enough, he said. The chips on both sides are already the same. Lord, Marcus replied, the difference in value is not more than 1 point. That is true, but it is not enough to make me change my mind, Marcus. Above the thunderclouds, the giant silhouette lowered his head and looked down at the newcomers in front of him. There was no longer any pity, only indifference and cruelty. Your chips are not enough to change my mind. Then, how about adding me in? After a long silence on the wheelchair, Marcus grinned and revealed a proud smile. My soul is here, Lord, even if I am old and insignificant. But if I can change your mind, it should be enough. How about it? Do you want to give it a try? The stooped old man propped himself up from the wheelchair, took a step forward, and proudly spread his arms. Can you make the flag of the Utopia fall from my hands? Just like that, under the gaze of the Lord, he arrogantly raised his head. He waited for the final reply. What responded to him was the thunder that shook the entire abyss and the laughter that echoed in countless hells. Very good, very good. You are indeed the best opponents. Enough to be my enemy. The Lord nodded in satisfaction. How do you want to bet, Marcus? Whether it is gladiatorial combat, knowledge, or even anything else, I am willing to accompany you. Then let's still use the old way. How about it? Marcus raised his hand and replied solemnly, if you want to decide the outcome between the present realm and hell, what could be more realistic than the duel between the countless records of events between the present realm and hell? When he raised his hand, the outline of a card rose from his aged fingertips and slowly rotated. The frame, color, and even the pattern and name on the card were changing constantly. The miracles created by countless souls, the harm caused by countless degenerates, every disaster, every redemption, every destruction, and every rebirth were all recorded in the book. The magnificent light illuminated every pair of eyes in the darkness. Then let's begin, people of the present realm. At that moment, the abyss roared. On the throne, the Lord raised his hands as if he was holding the axis of hell tightly. The light of thunder crisscrossed between the countless depths, causing the mighty and majestic voice to spread. Announce to hell, announce to the present realm, announce to every inch of the place. Let's use your methods and the things you seek as the stage. The Supreme King is announcing to the entire realm. The abyss gamble to determine the ownership of the old world begins now. At that moment, in the continuation courtyard, Huaishur woke up from his dream. Opening his eyes, he heard the thunder in the distance. Since 3 days ago, he had been arranged to be alone in the examination room, receiving various inspections from the continuation courtyard and meticulous maintenance, including his 3 meals and bathing time. It began a long wait. At that moment, the door opened and 008 stepped in. His footsteps hurried. "Get ready, Mr. Huaisher." The notice from the continuation courtyard was officially issued. "It's your turn to appear." Chapter 1109. Suddenly, Huaisher had no time to react, but instinctively looked around for his equipment. "But there's nothing here. There's only one rice bowl, which hasn't been finished yet. I don't know if it can be used on the battlefield. Are you sure?" Huaisher asked doubtfully. "Don't look for it." 008 replied. "Those things can't be used. You can only rely on yourself." "Do you have to tell me what's going on?" Huaisher followed behind him as they walked through the complicated corridors. She was confused. "There should be a limit to how much secrets can be kept. We need you to be ready to make sure that your mental state is stable and you can do your best at any time," 008 said without looking back. "You will be thrown into a war as a gladiator, Mr. Huaisher. You are a pawn and a tool. You have to defeat your enemy and win. Everyone who comes here has to. You have to help each other against hell." Behind 008, Huaisher subconsciously looked up at the top of his head. It's as if you can see a yellow exclamation mark emerging from the top of his head. It's pleasant. "I'm too familiar with this." Huaisher skillfully skipped the plot and asked directly, "Where is the enemy? How many to kill? How to kill?" "Everywhere. Everywhere. You can kill until you can't kill. As for decapitation or other things, it's up to you. Later, all the questions you have will be answered in the memory of the infusion." In front of the slowly opened door, 008's footsteps stopped and pointed to the complex instrument that unfolded like a cabin. "Please, Mr. Huaisher." Under the gloomy light, there was a chilling atmosphere. The premonition of death seemed to begin to creep up, but soon it disappeared. Huaisher scratched his head. "Stride in." The hatch closed, and darkness came. In front of another cabin, Ms. Chen smoked a cigarette and squinted at 091 beside her. "Soul extraction chamber? I know you bad guys don't have a good fart." 091 was unmoved, and the electronic voice was calm. "I promise this is one of the necessary steps." "Then what are we waiting for?" Madame Chen extinguished the cigarette with her foot and walked in with a sigh. She closed her eyes and said, "Hurry up." Slap. A crisp sound rang out. "Data extraction. Begin." In the same enclosed room, the burly old man was still squatting beside the extraction chamber and muttering to himself. "Don't be afraid. Everyone has their first time. It's inevitable that they'll be nervous. I've been through this before. I just need to close my eyes, and it'll be over. Let's just perform normally. Don't feel pressured. Safety first, competition second. Don't always rush forward blindly. That's enough. Go do your work." Under the heavy cable entanglement, Liz rolled her eyes and waited for him. "Am I a child in kindergarten?" Trier was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but scratch the wrinkles on his face. "Who isn't in front of me?" Liz was silent and speechless. The old man smiled and reached out his hand to stroke her hair. "Protect yourself and be careful, Liz. I know you too." Liz nodded. "Of course." The old man raised his head proudly. The hatch closed. In the darkness, he saw the light of the shadowless lamp and a few hurried figures. "Mr. Kamiyazumi is about to die," someone shouted. "The stasis zone can no longer seal the soul. We have to." "Then there's no need to seal it," an indifferent voice said coldly. A cold electronic voice spoke. "Perform soul extraction and transfer. Inject 5 units of outer path poison. After a repair operation, transfer him to the essence pool. Just keep him alive for a single breath." After a short pause, a cold mask covered the patient's face. The last thing he heard was the emotionless, cold words. It was as if he had entrusted a wisp of hope. "The time has come for your wish, Mr. Kamiyazumi," he said. "I wish you good luck." Here, there, in the preparation area of the entire isolation zone, in front of thousands of soul extraction chambers, one figure after another walked into them. Layers of cables wrapped around them. Cold liquid origin substance poured into them, extracting, transforming, and preserving souls. Under the projection of the silver ocean, flashes of light flowed like stars in the dark shadows of the Continuation Academy, flying to hell, throwing themselves into their own war. At this moment, in the Palace of the Thunder Ocean, the sound of cracking and shattering could be heard. The earth collapsed, and the stone slabs shattered and evaporated. Under the will of the Grand Lord, a huge fragment slowly materialized here, projecting a huge and lonely world in the air, just like the dead present realm. It was a scene of devastation. The fragment of the old Gaia still retained its appearance when it fell. Since the antecedent killed it, it fell into a stagnant time. Only a large number of disasters and miracles surged in it, changing constantly. This was the battlefield of the struggle, the chessboard of chess. At the same time, it was also the final bet. Behind Marcus' wheelchair, countless brilliance descended from the sky. After crossing a long distance, a rainbow bridge was transmitted, and one figure after another walked out from it. The chess players from the present realm had arrived. In addition to Isaac, who stood calmly behind Marcus after entering, there were 9 other candidates from different parts of the world. There was a slightly bloated old nun holding a rosary in her hand. There was an Indian man with a long white beard whose headscarf was full of jewels. There was a middle-aged man wearing a spotless white suit and sunglasses who looked like a gambler. There was even the inconspicuous creator, Nakajima, in the middle. There was also the Dongxiao ascendant at the back, looking left and right, trying to take a selfie with his phone. Baizé, 5 main candidates, 5 reserves. Marcus said, "Our chess players are all here. Senior Lord, what about your side's players?" On the throne, the Grand Lord glanced at the dust under his feet. After a long time, he looked to his side. "Have you seen enough?" He said, "Send out a few so that people won't be jealous that I represent the abyss." "Ha ha, in front of me? You're still too early." The King of Withered laughed mockingly and pointed to the front. He ordered his subordinate beside him. "White Snake, since they have pretended to invite me, you will go up and play chess for me." The old jester bowed. "I will not disappoint your majesty. It doesn't matter if you lose." The King of Withered waved his hand casually. "You don't have to feel pressured. Just do your best. It's just a gamble. Pleasure is the right thing to do, as long as it's not a sticky and unpleasant stalemate. I will be very satisfied whether it's a crushing defeat or a great victory." "Yes." White Snake accepted the order with a bitter smile and turned to walk to the chessboard. He also heard the king. He was loyal to order behind him. "Hey, you bring some fries and prawns from the present realm. It's just right for me to pass the time." At a time like this, he still wants his subordinates to eat for him. White Snake's footsteps paused. He was under a lot of pressure. "Tian Cheng, you go." The messenger of the Pied Piper glanced at the follower beside him. "I hope you understand something." "Yes." The pale and stooped jester stepped forward with his walking stick. "If I had known, I would have let Edward take this job." Mather sighed and got up from his chair. He walked to the other side of the Gaia fragment and bowed to the old man in the wheelchair. "This time, I'll have to trouble you again." In the wheelchair, Marcus calmly looked at the projection in front of him, indifferent. The trader of Golden Dawn didn't seem to care. He smiled and shuffled the pile of cards that appeared in his hand. He was full of anticipation. the rancher's beloved ruler, Archangel Justice, walked out of the door of paradise and received the order to make a sacrifice. The Eye of Obscurity sent out a descendant. In the squirming mud, half of a pale body appeared. He held a card in his hand, and his incomplete face was expressionless. Finally, under the seat of the Grand Lord, a thin figure in gray clothes walked out. His skin was bronze and covered in scars and tattoos. His appearance was even more handsome than the Grand Lord. It was hard to tell if he was a man or a woman. However, one of his eyes was blind and lifeless. There was an unsettling haze lingering in his empty eyes. The ruler of the Sea of Thunder, the beloved of the Moon of Decay, and the Blue Tide, the youngest son of the Grand Lord. Mantom. Just like that, when the players from Hell gradually got into position, the Grand Lord on the throne asked again, "Are you ready, Marcus?" "We can start at any time." The old man in the wheelchair answered. "Then let's start. If there are any tricks or strategies or even any cheating methods that can't be discovered, you can use them to your heart's content. But don't forget, Marcus, you're also one of the stakes." The Grand Lord announced coldly, "You're standing on the scale, but our bet is settled in real time. You understand?" "Of course." Marcus nodded, still smiling. From the moment the bet started, the situation on the field would determine the increase or decrease of the stakes. If the situation of the astronomy conference was good, then the fragment of Gaia would gradually transform into the present state. But if it wasn't good, then the defense line of the present state, including the 30 layers, would gradually disappear without a trace. At the same time, it would also affect Marcus. The state of his soul would be controlled by the situation of victory or defeat. Whether it rose or fell, it would no longer be up to him. Instead, it would be tortured as the players fought, hovering between sublimation and solidification. Now, let's decide who will make the first move. Everyone. Marcus raised his eyes. 2 of the chess players from the realm of reality, and Hell took a step forward. The man from India and the white snake under the withered king. Standing in front of the dice board, the 2 looked at each other expressionlessly. First, the Indian man took the initiative to spread out his hands to show his modesty. But the white snake didn't appreciate it. She coldly picked up the dice and threw it. 6 points. Full value. The Indian man smiled, picked up the dice, and threw it on the dice board. 6 points. Also full value. Both sides were equal, so they could only roll again. Behind Marcus, Isaac frowned slightly and clenched his fists in his sleeves. The dice thrown by the white snake spun strangely in the dice board and stopped. 5 points. Looks like I'm in luck. The Indian man smiled, picked up the dice, and threw it again. But the dice didn't roll. After it fell from his hand, it fell straight on the dice board. Again, it was 5 points. The Indian player froze on the spot. The 2 of them looked at each other, and their gazes became meaningful. This time, when White Snake threw the dice again, the result was a 3. Average value. After a long silence, the Indian man reached out and picked up the dice on the board. He held it tightly and threw it down. The dice seemed to have gone crazy, bouncing crazily on the plate, letting out screeching cries, and spinning at a very fast speed. Isaac's fingers flicked in his sleeves, but the dice didn't respond. It continued to spin wildly under the white snake's solemn gaze. It gradually slowed down, but the numbers on the 6 sides were fluctuating, shaking violently and flickering. In the end, cracks appeared all over, and a cracking sound was heard. Finally, it stopped at 4 points. Looks like I won. The Indian man smiled, helplessly. He raised his hand and scratched his sagging eye bags. His well-maintained palm was already covered with wrinkles and age spots. The stale smell quickly dissipated. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. He nodded to Marcus, glanced at Isaac, and returned to his seat with a smile. The first player was decided. The blood hidden in the dark couldn't be seen. Only Isaac calmly put his hands behind his back and hid the crack in his palm. Sargon's dice. In the central decision-making room of the Central Bureau, Xian Niao sighed with pity. He turned around and asked, "Isn't such a sacrifice a little too big?" It was a miracle mark brewed in the epic war recorded in Breaking in Bharat, the bloody battle between the Pandu and Kuru, the struggle between the 5 sons of hardened war and the 100 sons of hardened war. It was the reappearance of history. The glib-tongued Sargon lured the leader of the 5 sons of hardened war to gamble with him. Through the dice made from the bones of his biological father, he won hardened war's property, status, and even wife and brothers. He beat the gods' blessed law maintainer into the dust, forcing the other party to leave his home. In the end, because of this set of dice that he was so proud of, he died in Krishna's scheme. As for his ending, the moment he used that set of dice, it had already been decided. The karma born from going against the gods, the backlash caused by rashly changing fate. Every point he gained would be lost 1,000 times in the future. It was the same for the person who used this miracle mark. The greater the gain, the more shocking the change, and the more terrifying the debt and karma in one's fate would be in the future. The price of gaining the upper hand in the abyssal gamble was enough to make himself, his family, and even his descendants unable to repay it for generations. They would sink into eternal pain. A Nidro's sacrifice is his contribution to the present realm. As his brother, I have no right to interfere. The leader of the Indian maintenance genealogy, Sandhu, calmly replied, "It's just a matter of course. There's no need to feel emotional, Your Excellency Mystic Bird." "It's just a pity," Mystic Bird sighed softly. "If it's not a problem, I can borrow the white wolf hook for the time being." "No need. The maintenance genealogy has its own way." Sandhu smoked quietly. His green eyes were calm and expressionless. Or perhaps he had already shed all his tears, and the game had already begun. Stars constantly fell into the chessboard formed by the old Gaia according to the will of the chess player. In Isaac's hand, the stack of 6 cards that had just been drawn shook slightly without even looking at them. After an instant of flickering, they seemed to become different and then flickered again. Under the hem of the robe, the faces of the cards kept changing until finally they returned to calmness. He flipped out a sentry post without looking at it and threw it into the chessboard. After occupying the maze area in the middle of the chessboard, he took advantage of the cost of the sentry post land card to throw in a sublimata. Midnight Storm? Chan. The soul of the sublimator descended from the sky and entered the chessboard. Pass. In the first round, no matter who played first, both sides did not do anything other than play land cards and throw in a few low-cost creatures. The most important thing was to occupy the miracle source point and important terrain marked on the chessboard. They were not in a hurry to fight. However, when the second round arrived, Isaac's faint gaze landed on the city that was shrouded in white that was occupied by the other side. It made the white snake's heart suddenly shrink for a moment. Vigilance. But it did not understand where this uneasy premonition came from. Until in the oppressive atmosphere that made people unable to breathe, Isaac flipped his wrist and pushed out a card toward the city occupied by the white snake. Prince of Paradise. Why sure? What the hell? The white snake's eyes began to twitch violently, and it was furious. Where did you get the cost and resources? Moreover, you don't have a land card here. No, I have one. Isaac replied calmly and pushed another card toward the projection of the battlefield, floating in front of the white snake. The moment the second round began, Isaac's attack had already arrived in front of the white snake. The classic spell of the Utopia card deck. From the Abyss. That was a unique tactic developed under the supercompatibility of celestial genealogy and the abyss. In short, designate a production unit in the infernal realm and forcefully requisition it to become your own land card. After using it, it would be destroyed immediately. Your land is very good, but now it's mine, and I won't leave it for you later. Oh, it's getting interesting. The withered king, who was holding the potato chips, paused for a moment and smiled. At that moment, the sound of collapse came from the city occupied by the White Snake. The gates of hell quickly fell apart and was replaced by a sentry post that rose from the ground. Light rose and received the meteor from the present realm. Fall. Waves spread, and wherever it passed, the earth burst out with a roar. In the rising light, as the meteor entered, a brand new body was quickly cast from the light. Spine, internal organs, limbs, head, and even hair and clothes. In the blink of an eye, it was reborn from the darkness. After completing its mission, the simple sentry post exploded with a bang and disappeared without a trace. At that moment, Weisher finally opened his eyes after a long wait. Just like that, the tool was thrown under the nose of the infernal chess players by the vice president, whom he trusted so much a cold wind and snow blew in his face. In front of him were ruins frozen in ice, a dilapidated city drowned in snow and cold wind. Dozens of wind and frost pillars fell from the collapsed overpass. Under the strong wind, it let out a whimper. As Weisher breathed, precious heat turned into white mist and rose into the sky. This was the world that had long died. Old Gaia. Chapter 1110. Thank you, Guild Master Gaji. The instant teleportation brought him a long-lost dizziness and confusion. However, through the memories from the Continuation Institute, he quickly understood his current situation. The cause and effect unfolded in his mind like a compressed package, bringing the shock and emotion that every tool should have. This time, he had really become a tool through and through. Everyone else was playing cards, but he was the card. He might as well do it in one go. And the stakes were the direction of the upcoming War of the Worlds and the safety of the current situation. When he raised his head and took a deep breath in the world of ice and snow, he felt a stabbing pain in his lungs. An unprecedented weakness made him shiver in the cold wind, and every snowflake that fell on his body could cause needle-like wounds. Super low temperature. In front of his eyes, the entire city that had turned into ruins was shrouded in an unusual cold, making people suspect that even their souls were about to be frozen by the cold wind. What was worse was that this body, only grade 2, the status that appeared in the Book of Destiny was no longer the status bar he was familiar with, but another card that he hadn't seen in a long time. Prince of Paradise, Ascendant. It was as if a status had been fixed at the Mountain Ghost stage. Apart from the abilities of the ordinary Mountain Ghost, everything else had disappeared. And there were 2 more inherent skills. Mountain Ghost. When in a forest, Weisher's HP will double according to the number of forests, and every attack will recover HP equivalent to the number of forests. Prince. Enemy female characters' attack and defense will be reduced by 1, and all female characters' attack and defense will be increased by 1. It could only be said that it was a relatively ordinary early character. After all, the attack and defense of a grade 2 Ascendant was completely useless. If it was Prince's effect, it would be a good skill, but it was limited to females. The only thing that stood out was the Mountain Ghost skill. It could recover HP, and it increased according to the number of forest cards, and every attack had a healing effect. In some situations, it could temporarily act as a health bowl at a low cost, allowing the cannon fodder's mission to last longer. It was a little better than some cards that could only be used as toys, but it was also limited. The overall evaluation could only be said to be ordinary. This was Weisher's current state. Other than the Sword of Virtue, he had no other equipment no forging furnace, no alchemy fire, and he couldn't even use his soul ability. It was a complete blank slate. The moment he appeared, he instinctively operated his divine mark and soul, trying to communicate with the local vitality, but he felt nothing. There were no plants here. All living things had died long ago. In addition, no matter how he tried to sense it, he was unable to extract any origin substance from the air. His entire body was locked in the card state. Due to Isaac's embarrassing act of snatching the floor, his entire body was in a state of fatigue. Most importantly, he was about to freeze to death, shivering in the cold wind. The extreme cold was ravaging his body at every moment. Even a sublimator could not endure this terrifying winter that could freeze even steel. There was probably only one silver lining in all the misfortunes. He lowered his head and looked at his hands. He took a deep breath. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. Dispelling the spasms in his 4 limbs, he activated overload. With the crazy consumption of heat, the cold wind was blocked by the boiling blood, and everything returned to normal. Although the consumption of physical strength was also accelerating, at least he avoided the tragic fate of freezing to death in the ice and snow. Especially, boom, at that moment, a burning flame suddenly appeared in the sky above Huaishir's head. In the earth-shattering sound, the thick dark clouds seemed to be burned red. A huge meteorite fell from the sky, wrapped in disaster and despair. The friction produced blazing flames, tore through the cold wind, penetrated the collapsed ruins, and smashed to the ground. A strange palace-like building emerged from the peeling meteorite, and under the crack in the ground, dazzling flames and lava spewed out. Palace of Descent. The moment the turn began, the white snake did not hesitate to smash the brand new ground. Then, the second card fell from the crack in the lava, and the sticky boiling sound spread. Then, a twisted palm suddenly stretched out from the lava and pressed on the frozen ground, making a sizzling sound. Under the double envelopment of the wind, snow, and lava, many bodies covered in pitch-black stony skins slowly crawled out from the lava. Their human-like silhouettes were emitting waves of high heat. They held huge swords and axes formed from obsidian in their hands, crying out loudly. Everywhere they passed by, the ground was set ablaze, leaving behind charred footprints. Soon, all the monsters born from the lava turned their heads in unison and looked at Huaishir. Their big mouths full of sharp teeth curled up as if they were grinning ferociously. A total of 162 monsters, with the white snake's hell card set, live and die together. After connecting with the other lands of the same faction and obtaining enough power, he finally threw in the solidified souls from hell. Large group fire cast remnants. At this moment, the burning crimson and pitch-black colors had already surrounded Huaishir. There was no way to escape. Is this what you want? White Snake raised his eyes and looked at Isaac. You sent your lucky mascot right under my nose, entering deep into the enemy's territory alone without any help, just to let him die a horrible death. 2 mistakes. Isaac's fingers tapped on the back of the card covering the table, and he replied calmly, First of all, Mr. Huaishir is not a mascot. Second, someone might die a horrible death. He paused for a moment, and a strange look appeared on his solemn face. But it will definitely not be him. Along with his words, a tragic scream rose from the domain of Frozen City. Right in front of Huaishir, a fire-cast demon knelt on the ground in horror, unable to support his broken right leg. Then he saw that right in front of him, Huaishir clenched his fist, aiming at his head, and then triple drummer, thunderbolt. A loud, thunderous sound spread out, and a headless corpse fell to the sky, quickly collapsing into lava and gravel. Only Huaishir slowly raised his head and looked at the enemies who surrounded him. He couldn't help but smile. I just felt cold, and someone sent charcoal to my door. Are you some hellish charity organization coming to rescue me? Under his feet, cracks suddenly appeared in the snow and ice. A huge wave spread under the trampling. In an instant, it swept past countless collapsed and broken buildings, flew into the distance, and disappeared. But even so, all the hellish creatures present felt an unprecedented uneasiness in their hearts. It was as if they had been swallowed into the stomach of some terrifying behemoth, and they felt suffocated for no reason. Before his smile, "Your heartbeats are very good," Huaisher praised. "Although soon they won't be able to jump anymore." Boom! Another thunderous sound burst out from the large group from under Huaisher's feet, all the way to the end of the formation. Everywhere it passed, everything fell apart under the whirling and slashing of the axe of wrath. It was as if a scar had been torn apart. Lava that resembled blood splashed out, burning this city that had been frozen for countless years. And death at that moment came in Huaisher's hands. The tragic ravaging and killing came without reason. Holding the axe of wrath and the sword of virtue, Huaisher stepped forward and destroyed everything that could still move in front of him. The sound of the wind blowing in the sky, the remaining echoes of the tremors deep in the earth, the scattered noises of the falling snow, and even the crisp whine of the ice breaking, even the breathing of the large group, the beating of the heart of lava, and their roars. For a moment, everything was seamlessly combined into one, as if it was supposed to be like this. Under the resonance, Huaisher grasped it in his hand. Mastery, symphony. At this moment, a power that surpassed cognition descended on the body of the mountain ghost. It was not a power brought about by a miracle, nor was it a gift from hell. It was just a person's will and skill that pried open the cruel reality. With oneself as the fulcrum, the power of heaven and earth. Even if his body was so weak compared to Yin Zhongjuan, Huaisher's power, which was hundreds of times stronger than his, wantonly ravaged the enemies in front of him. In the end, among the countless solidified lava and broken limbs, only a figure was left, and the broken hall of descent in front of him. The style is too uncoordinated. "My friend." Huaisher sighed softly and raised his head. It was as if he could see the gloomy expression of the white snake through the eternal snow and dark clouds. In his hand, the sword of virtue lit up with a bright glow. It was aimed at the hall of descent in front of him. "Since it's an illegal building, no one will complain about me if I tear it down, right?" Tens of thousands of streams of light gathered on the blade and rose. After merging with Huaisher's origin form, it quickly turned into a fierce light that tore through the dark clouds and darkness. The fierce light rose and shrouded the silent city once again. It illuminated Huaisher's mocking smile. Just like that, it slashed towards the hall of descent from hell. In the roar, the remains of the meteorite fell apart. In the violent collapse, a loud sound echoed. Soon, no traces of the past could be seen. Only the ruins remained in the ruins. It was harmonious and merged into one. As the dust gradually dissipated in the cold wind, only Huaisher's figure walked out of it. Like a character who had just appeared, he smiled at all the audience. He raised his hands and made a heart sign. "Love you." Unfortunately, no one responded. Until now, the voice of the vice principal finally sounded in Huaisher's ears. "It seems that you're doing well." "Not at all, not at all. It's all because of the warm welcome of the people from hell." Huaisher scratched his head and casually found a seat to sit down. He asked curiously, "It's just that I don't remember when Mr. Isaac started to be so heartless." Isaac was silent for a long time and sighed apologetically. "Let me tell you a piece of bad news. According to the advice the principal left me before I set off, In the early stages of the situation with limited resources, I need to first strengthen Ms. Chen's combat strength. The existence of Anubis is crucial to the entire battle situation. Therefore, I'm afraid you can only play to your strengths, Mr. Huaisher. He said, "Do as you wish. You can take whatever you want." That old bastard is such a bastard. Huaisher was stunned. What if I die? Is he finally going to make a move on me? Little kitten? That's another piece of good news. Isaac replied, "The principal stuffed 5 of your cards into my deck. This means that you can die 5 times. He added meaningfully, "That's right. At least." Chapter 11:11. It was like the sudden opening of a 0 yuan purchase in hell. It was good news enough to double the stock price. Once became 5 times. The lifespan of the tool man had been increased by more than doubling. Congratulations. Huaisher felt that his price-performance ratio was beginning to exceed. He just didn't know if there would be any gifts if he placed an order now. That's really great news. He sighed without emotion. I'm so happy that I can't close my mouth. The greater the trouble, the greater the responsibility. Huaisher. The honest man Isaac couldn't ignore his conscience. After a long silence, he sighed, "It's a pity that so many things prepared before can't be used." "It's my duty, Mr. Isaac." Huaisher shook his head. "You do your job, and I do mine. The rest will be left to the rest. So, my job is not to wander aimlessly on the chessboard to annoy others, right?" After a moment of silence, Isaac replied dryly, "Part of it is correct. Wander or annoy others." The short pause didn't last long. Isaac continued calmly, "You need to look for something. In this deserted world, the closest thing to you should be in the city you are in." He changed the subject. Huaisher was stunned, but it was too late to complain. He heard the words from Isaac. "You should be able to perceive that one of the things that can shake this world is hidden in the ruins of the city under your feet." In silence, Huaisher turned back. He looked at the deepest part of Frozen City. It was a collapsed tall building covered by ice and snow, and something hidden in the shadow of the tall building. It didn't call out, nor did it show any magic. But of course, there was a sense of huge existence that couldn't be ignored. Like the biggest and reddest button among countless buttons, its undoubted uniqueness made it stand out from the ruins and attract everyone's attention. "What happens after you find it?" Huaisher asked. "This is what I can promise you." "Huaisher," Isaac replied. "It's just like I said, you can get whatever you want. It's the same logic." The meaning behind his words was already obvious. There was no need to care about the Continuation Academy or the war situation. Once you get it, it's all yours. After the short communication, Huaisher looked back at the battlefield behind him. The high temperature was still rising, and the residual heat had not dissipated. Unfortunately, the long-awaited warmth was unable to awaken the vitality that had long passed away. It only dissipated in vain in the cold wind. It was a waste. Huaisher casually cut his own finger. Drops of blood dripped down, sinking into the earth that was still warm. Soon, strange flowers and shrubs grew in this city that had been dead for a long time. Absorbing the residual warmth from the surface, the flowers from hell grew rapidly, forming a temporary and brilliant sea of flowers. After covering all the corpses of the hell creatures, the flowers quickly withered, shrank, and returned to Huaisher's feet. They wrapped around his wrist and formed a slightly charming garland bracelet. With the replenishment of these vitality, at least he did not have to worry about the cold wind and exhaustion. He nodded in satisfaction. He sighed silently. Now, he finally understood why the Continuation Academy spared no effort to find so many different people to participate in this, including himself, Shang Quan, Liz, the Vice-Chancellor, the Lotus Emperor, Nanin's mother, and even more people he had never seen before. At this moment, each of the chess pieces here had enough cases of the weak defeating the strong, above a fixed number of performance above the standard. Whether it was luck or skill or performance that others could not reach or inhuman control of the situation, or perhaps it was simply an unreasonable cheat, such as Supreme, and each of them had more than one infinite world card, storing their different periods and different states of themselves, witnessing the miracles and great achievements they had established, coupled with the consciousness and soul that had long surpassed the past. After understanding this, he couldn't help but shudder. Now, the sword Saint Shang Quan, who had reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship and whose attainments no one could pry and measure, had regained a young body coupled with the various supreme that he had, and that swordsmanship that was enough to kill gods and spirits with just a long sword. It was simply a nightmare. Above the distant sky, the dull thunder resounded again. Also, some kind of chill that made Huaishi's hair stand on end was brewing in the distant area that he could not pry into, rising into the sky. At this moment, a long distance away, on the wilderness that was full of bones, a rain of blood poured down. Countless calamities rapidly converged in the clouds and transformed. The lightning palace was like a monster's embryo. There was a strange silhouette rapidly growing in the clouds. Rain of blood, fission of bones, realm of nothingness. 3 overlapping spell cards endlessly stirred the cloud-filled sky, sprinkling a downpour of blood rain. Thousands of thick limbs slowly stretched out from the depths of the clouds. In the ear-piercing cry, the limbs casually clawed at the ground below, easily tearing apart the rocks, stone halls, soil, and other things. After leaving behind deep cracks, it came to an abrupt end. It paused on the spot. Then, the crisp sound of a sword being unsheathed burst out from the ground. The downpour of blood rain disappeared without a trace, as if it was cut in half. The monster that had yet to be born from the thunderclouds let out a piercing scream. Countless thick limbs were cut from the middle, the cut as smooth as a mirror, falling to the ground. In the end, a straight and sharp slash mark appeared above the thundercloud. Soon, the sky was filled with blood rain, thunderclouds, and even monsters. Under the sword, they all disappeared. Only a few huge limbs that were rapidly decaying were left, like weathered boulders, rolling and tumbling pathetically. At this moment, on the blood-stained wilderness, only the young man with the feather weave was left, and the long sword in his hand that could not bear the burden and had cracks on it. A mere celestial phenomenon is not worth mentioning. The sword saint raised his hand, stretched his overly young fingers, and smiled. Although the tool is useless, such a young body is really refreshing. Mountain beheading wanderer Shang Quan, 20 years old. No, 17 years old. Unfortunately, I'm not 40 years old. When I was a teenager, I still neglected to exercise. He clenched his fists, and blue veins appeared on his arms and shoulders that were full of cuts. Soon, they disappeared under the skin. He did not care about those insignificant things. Stepping over the remaining bones of the enemy, he stepped forward. Just like that, he walked into the collapsed mountain in a grand manner. After passing through the countless skeletal frames that looked like bird houses, he saw the resplendent object in the deepest part of the deep pool. It was like the ultimate color that could be mixed with melted gold and diamonds, changing and shining. Is this the so-called blood of Gaia? After a moment of silence, he murmured in realization, it does seem like the arrival of a special reward. However, isn't this temptation a little too strong? At this moment, in his eyes, the gorgeous color and light were reflected. It was as if the world itself had shown the source of its own mystery to the visitor, revealing the creation and destruction of all things and showing endless possibilities and changes. It was a question that went straight to the heart. What is it that you want? Would I want strength, power, and influence, women, or swordsmanship? No, those were just insignificant embellishments, and it was not even enough to waste a moment of thought. When he was young, he longed for the power to dominate the world. When he was young, he longed for the beauty that he could share weal and woe with. When he was middle-aged, he wanted to have the power to make the whole world surrender. But when he was old and witnessed many changes and the vicissitudes of life, he would understand that those were not what he wanted. In the end, even the swords that grew on the side of the body ushered in their own end. At the end of this lonely road, he was the only one left. What I want is a sword that I can use. That's enough. At that moment, accompanied by the sigh of the sword saint, a tear-like sparkling arc emerged from his fingertips. As if it had heard his wish, the world generously donated. A simple and unadorned long sword quietly appeared at his waist. The blade of the sword sighed sadly and trembled slightly, a silent low hum. At that moment, on the huge fragment of Gaia, dragons and snakes rose, and the earth trembled. Accompanied by a deafening sound, the dry wilderness disappeared from the center of the chessboard. It appeared at the other end of the reality. In the decision-making room, there were cheers of suppressed excitement, and many people clenched their fists in excitement. They won a city first. It's a pity that the Egyptians didn't come to such a grand event. In front of the chessboard, the smoking gambler shrugged. I always feel that they are good at playing cards. This cold joke, like all his previous cold jokes, didn't get the audience's appreciation. In the silence, other than the glow of the world of cards, there was only the huge change that enveloped the entire domain in the fragment of old Gaia. As one card after another was thrown into it, countless miracles and disasters intertwined with each other, condensing into forms and descending upon it continuously. And in the observation of the reality, the correction value and distortion were also surging rapidly. The success of the worship of the Sword Saint had led the correction value by a large margin, reaching the range of 1%. At this moment, the blood of Gaia hidden in the fragment was still hiding its glow. That might be the last gift and essence of Mother Earth. The blood left in the reality. This showdown and bet between the reality and the abyss was no longer a mere game, but a reconfiguration of the entire world under the control of the chess player. With countless cards representing the records of both sides fighting again and again, using the purest victory and defeat to redefine everything in this world. It was like a tug of war. Did it belong to the reality or hell? At this moment, there was another loud roar from the chessboard. The waning man from India, Anidru, gripped his cards tightly, his face ashen. A small mistake, and the tables were turned. He watched helplessly as his spoils of war were grasped in the hands of hell. The maze-like city fell to the other end of hell. Another city was lost in the huge palace, a magnificent golden light condensed into a dazzling halo above the head of the hunting angel. A pair of wings spread out from his back. The Paradise of Blessings card set, Saint of Hell, Praiser, outside the chessboard. Archangel Righteousness nodded in satisfaction and gave another order. Thus, after devouring all of the enemies, the gentle face once again lifted up and wiped away the blood at the corner of its mouth. It cheerfully stepped into the open door in front of it. On the other side of the door was the ruins of the city in a world of ice and snow. Chapter 11-12. In less than half an hour after the start of the game, the war between the present realm and Inferno had begun within the chessboard, where time was accelerated. So fast. In the decision-making room, Russell tapped his fingers on the table and sighed softly. It was hard to understand. Wasn't the Continuation Academy's style too radical this time? It was too fast, faster than expected. After the fourth round, The two sides began to fight and kill each other in the middle of the game, step by step. In addition to Dongsha, who took the lead, America, India, and even the Russian Federation had also placed all their important economic structures on the edge of the battlefield and began to fight fiercely. In contrast, the celestial genealogy, which used to be headstrong and reckless, was now together with the Indian genealogy, staying at the back of the battlefield and developing unhurriedly, which was shocking. However, Isaac's tactics were inspired by Russell, so he wasn't in a hurry. After saving up the dragon, summoning flute, and Anubis, wouldn't he be able to fight wherever he wanted? Besides, wasn't there still a Huaishur outside? Keeping this scourge at home would only drag down the economy, so throwing him out to the other side as a cancer was the right way to use him. However, it was the tactics adopted by the Abyss that made Russell a little confused. The two sides seemed to have been completely switched. The ascendants of the present realm began to advance rapidly, while the rulers of the Abyss began to fight steadily. Did they take the wrong script from a reality show? I really don't understand. Russell looked back at the mystic bird and instigated, "What do you think?" How to look at it was another matter. The key was, why don't you take a look at it with the eyes of the stars? "I'm not looking." The mystic bird obviously knew what Russell was up to. She sat as still as a mountain. "Anyway, I'm not the one going up. I've done what I can. How can I command the front line from the rear? But there aren't many times you've completely left things alone, right?" Russell asked in return, "Since we're so familiar with each other, can you disclose any arrangements in advance?" When the people around heard this, their ears seemed to stand up. Even the feathered serpent couldn't help but glance back. As for the mystic bird, it sat steadily without moving. "You're about to retire. Why are you worrying so much?" Xian Niao glanced at Russell meaningfully. He didn't know who this sentence without a subject was referring to. "What about Bai Zhe?" Russell asked. "He hasn't played yet. He can't be a decoration in the reserve team, right? Do you want me to go on stage if I'm not just a decoration?" Xian Niao calmly drank his tea and then threw out a piece of news that made everyone's eyeballs fall to the ground. "She doesn't know how to play cards." If you wanted to talk about eating, drinking, traveling, taking selfies, talking about cats, and playing with dogs, she was good at it. Maybe she could even share her experience with you. As for the rest, just forget about it. Speaking of this, Mystic Bird clearly recalled the painful past where she had to reimburse the other party for antihypertensive drugs every time she worked with someone. Mystic Bird's expression became hesitant after hearing this. Russell couldn't help but look up at his student on the screen. For some reason, he felt the same helplessness as Xian Niao. He patted the old man's shoulder, and the two of them sighed and sipped their tea. He stopped looking. He was mentally exhausted. Until now, Golden Dawn is still not willing to put in more effort. On the opposite side of the chessboard, Gongyi, under the armor, glanced at Mathers beside him. "Isn't he a little too lazy?" Mathers smiled calmly and let the Russian genealogy take away the strategic point that was at his fingertips. He threw down another land card without a care in the world. "But with hard work, there is a reward. Sir, the time spent working hard is always long. But where is your reward?" Gongyi asked. "Don't worry, it's not time yet," Mathers calmly replied. He noticed the cold eyes of his teammates around him, and he seemed to feel that he had been too lazy. Finally, he didn't waste time like before. After taking out a card from his pile of cards, he threw it into the battlefield without looking at it. "However, before the crops are ruined, let's put 2 scarecrows in the field." Along with his words, the clouds were torn apart by a shining golden light. A huge, deep pit suddenly appeared on the ground that was covered by the fog. A skinny and silent figure slowly climbed out of it. Barefoot, he stepped into the flowing poisonous water, allowing it to sizzle. But his expression was calm and almost solemn, as if he couldn't feel any pain. His messy beard fluttered in the wind. He looked haggard. Right in front of the holy temple, the middle-aged monk slowly raised his eyes and raised his hand. His 5 fingers curled into a seal and extended towards the ground. Bang! Then the ground wailed, and thousands of cracks appeared out of nowhere. It was as if a big mouth suddenly appeared from the ground. It opened and instantly swallowed the Russian Federation's holy temple along with the enemy inside. There was no time to resist or even react. Amidst the rumbling, the ground slowly closed. Only the numbing sound of cracking could be heard from the ground, and blood spurted out from the soil. And the thing that caused all this was just an ordinary bronze frame world card. There wasn't even a name on it. Ascetic, or perhaps he could call the owner of this card by another name that was even more awe-inspiring to the deaf, the Heretic King. Ha! It's just the land of bliss. The giant hammer was swung around, setting off a storm of blood in the crowd of hell. A burly figure stepped on the bones of hell creatures and slowly walked out of the battlefield. Behind him was a tragic scene, with blood flowing everywhere. Leaning on the hammer in his hand, the young man shook his head in disdain. He combed his messy hair to the back of his head and let out a long sigh. Although his muscles were well-defined, and he looked handsome and dignified, his coquettish appearance still made people want to hit him. Giant whale Wangabeo, or rather, the young Kwafu at such a young age. He had already grown to look like nobody wanted him. Abeo, don't be coquettish, okay? Your legs are about to break. Chaos, who was playing chess, reminded him expressionlessly, don't pose. Help from the left. You still have teammates. Ha, Brother Kwafu, am here, okay? Kwafu dragged the hammer indifferently and rushed to the place of support. He complained, just a support is enough. Don't bring so many people here. They're in the way. Forget it, just don't drag me down. Before he finished speaking, he felt a strong wind above his head. After a loud noise, the bone spell giant, which was several meters tall, flew into the air. After smashing 2 walls, it smashed into pieces on the stone tablet. Through the gap, one could see the fierce battle scene inside. Under the crystal glow of Gaia's blood, almost countless hell creatures occupied the entire interior of the palace. The towering bone spell giants roared and kept pouncing on a slender figure, but they were all destroyed by the lone girl with iron fists. Oh my God, neck-killing hand, leg throwing. It's rare to see such beautiful Wing Chun in this day and age. Kwafu stuck his head out and exclaimed, especially when he saw the girl's beautiful yet cold face and her starry eyes. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Hey, Kwafu widened his eyes. When did Domxia have such a beautiful girl? Hey! Chaos tried to stop him, but under the impulse of his instinct to seek a mate, Kwafu had already roared, grabbed the hammer, and jumped into the battlefield recklessly. He shouted at the girl who was besieged, "Little girl, don't be afraid. I'll protect you." In an instant, he smashed the giants blocking the way with his hammer. He went all the way forward. After killing the entire formation, he turned around and rushed back as if he was showing off. 7 in and 7 out. It was as if he had entered a place where no one could stop him, until all the large groups were smashed to pieces under the hammer. In the pool of blood, only Kwafu, who was covered in wounds, proudly put his hands on his hips and laughed. "How are you? Are you okay?" He patted his chest and asked, "Oh, I'm late. Otherwise, how could my teammates be besieged?" "Don't worry, leave it to me. I'll keep you safe." The girl was stunned for a moment. She nodded and thanked him. "Thank you so much." "You're welcome." Kwafu came over, rubbed his hands, and asked with a flattering smile, "By the way, how should I address you?" "Ah, me? The girl was stunned for a moment, as if she was thinking. Juju, she replied. Juju, which means two jades in a match. Juju? Ha! It sounds like, well, it sounds good. Kwafu hummed and hawed for a long time, but he couldn't find any adjectives. He almost wrote, I want to praise, but I don't know what to say on his face. The girl looked at him helplessly. Finally, she couldn't help shaking her head and sighing. You're injured. Let me treat you. She reached out and took out the needle bag, motioning Kwafu to sit down. Kwafu immediately felt warm in his heart. For so many years, he had been delivering water, repairing computers, and running errands for free. He had never enjoyed such treatment. He was almost moved to tears, especially when he felt the cold, little hand caressing the wound on his back. He sucked in a breath of cold air with pleasure. However, he didn't know why, but there was a strange feeling faintly rising in his heart. Juju? Juju? Or saw illusion? I seem to have heard this name somewhere, he asked doubtfully. I don't think so. After all, few people know it. Behind him, the girl sighed with melancholy. Compared with the famous Kwafu, I can only be a nobody in Domxia. No. He smiled honestly. Before he could say anything, he heard a faint sigh behind him. Now, people generally like to call me Emperor Qing. The silence was sudden. In a daze, Kwafu turned his head stiffly, only to see the green light illuminating her expressionless face. Poison and vitality overlapped, forming the outline of the curse of Wood Demon. Juju with magical hands and poisonous heart. Chapter 11:13. In the decision-making room, Xian Niao's expression twitched. His hand, that was holding the teacup, trembled slightly. Toothache. What the F***CK is going on? Why didn't I beat this embarrassing thing to death back then? How good would it be to end it all? Originally, he had always thought that although Kwafu was a little silly, lazy, liked to court death, and lacked women, at least he was still a good child. He could still be saved. At most, he could teach him more setbacks. In the end, so many setbacks didn't wake this fool up at all. Now he was courting death and flirting with Grandma's house. What was the seniority of the Qing Emperor's old lady? She was the elder that even Xian Niao had to greet as a junior when he saw her. Even his teacher, Lu Wu of the previous generation, had to call her elder sister obediently when he saw her. In the end, how could a fool like you walk on the road of death while singing and dancing? He couldn't even stop him. Did he really think that the wood spirit corpse forest behind Mount Yudai grew out of thin air? It seemed that the lesson from the sea reclamation wasn't enough. Xian Niao held the teacup and made the future arrangements expressionlessly. When he came back, he would find an excuse to send him to let Tyr beat him up twice. In this regard, Kwafu and the Qing Emperor had joined forces. With their extraordinary output and defense, as well as unreasonable healing methods and recovery effects, there was no need to worry at all. On the other side, there was also the cooperation of Handan and Bai Zhe, so he didn't need to worry. As for the field, he looked at the snowy frozen city. He looked at the praises who had descended into the dead city, and Huaisher who had walked into the building. Things were getting interesting. Under the light of the crystal lamp, the hall was filled with the fragrance of citrus. A soft melody echoed in his ears. Not far away, the sound of chatting and laughing came from the tea house and lounge. The warm wind blew in his face, making Huaisher in a daze for a moment. Name. The manager behind the front desk looked up and asked. Huaisher's expression twitched. He turned back and looked out of the window. Outside the window, the dead silent city in the ice and snow was like a ruin. The cold wind whimpered, and ice and snow fell endlessly from the sky. But when he raised his head and looked at everything in front of him again, he suddenly felt a sense of unreality. From the moment he stepped into this place, it was as if he had entered another world, another dream that should not have appeared here. Now, the character in his dream was standing in front of Huaishir. "Name, sir," the front desk manager asked politely. "Russell." Huaishir answered instantly. "All right, Mr. Huaishir." The front desk manager lowered his head to record. "Age? 90? More than 100? I didn't notice. Just think of me as an old man." Huaishir sighed. 19. The manager at the front desk continued to write. After looking up at him, he lowered his head and continued, "In terms of gender, it should be male." "Impudent! How dare you assume my gender?" Huaishir raised his eyebrows, almost writing the word exhausted on his face. But the smiling front desk manager still didn't care. He just pushed a black card in front of Huaishir. "It's a pity that we can no longer provide you with accommodation and catering services, but I guess you may not be here for this." The manager at the front desk nodded and said goodbye with a smile. "The elevator is on your right. The manager will receive you in the reception room on the top floor." In silence, Huaishir looked down at the black card on the table. After a long time, he sighed, picked it up, turned around, and walked toward the elevator. However, after taking 2 steps, he couldn't help but look back behind him. In the hotel lobby, where singing and dancing were thriving, soft music still echoed. "Hey, are you still alive?" he asked the front desk manager. The front desk manager, who lowered his head to deal with his work, smiled slightly and didn't answer. He just bent down and bowed with his hand on his chest. He respectfully sent him off. The elevator closed. Surrounded by the elegant, ancient style, Huaishir in the elevator felt that he was rising steadily. In the end, he stopped at the top. Outside the open elevator door, there was only one road. At the end of the red carpet, there was an open door. In front of the desk, a middle-aged man in a black suit stood upright and nodded slightly to the visitor. "Welcome, Mr. Huaishir. To be honest, I'm not sure whether this is an illusion or something else." Huaishir looked around, reached out, and touched the flower in the bottle. The flower seemed to feel the breath of the same origin and gave back real and subtle joy. "It doesn't matter if it's an illusion left behind by the past." The manager smiled indifferently and gestured for Huaishir to sit down. "Lucky people like us have been blessed by miracles to be able to continue to this day, by chance. Even if it becomes an illusion, it doesn't seem unacceptable. What kind of test is this?" Huaishir asked curiously. "You issue a task, and I help you solve it. After that, you give me the thing, and I turn around and leave." The manager was stunned for a long time, as if he had found an unexpected path. "Can it be like this? Isn't it like this?" Huaishir was dumbfounded. "Of course not." The manager spread his hands. "Would a group of illusions from the past have any desires? Besides, what we want has already been given to me." When he said this, he showed a nostalgic smile. "In contrast, I'm more curious," the manager suddenly asked. "What do you want, Mr. Huaishir?" When the question was asked, the pair of calm eyes seemed to be filled with some kind of magnificent brilliance, reflecting Huaishir's soul and consciousness. A question that could not be refused. There was also no room for any lies, waiting for the answer that emerged from the deepest part of the soul. Then, the moment the answer emerged, he was stunned on the spot. "I want to live a happy life," Huaishir replied. Such a wish and desire made the surging blood of Gaia fall into stagnation and silence. Was it too insignificant or too greedy? It was difficult to evaluate, but it was not within the scope of realization. "That's too difficult, Mr. Huaishir." The manager wiped his sweat awkwardly. "Can you change it?" World peace? Huaisher asked again tentatively. Or erase hell? The manager sighed again. It's unrealistic, no matter how you think about it. That's right, it's a little beyond the scope. Huaisher scratched his head. Let me think about it. This in such a short time. I can't think of anything even if you suddenly ask me. It's okay, you can think about it seriously. The manager comforted him. As long as you think of it, you can take that card and tell me at any time. After a short pause, he suddenly showed a sympathetic look. However, I'm afraid you don't have much time. At that moment, Huaisher's body suddenly had a premonition of death. His 10 fingers contracted and suddenly clenched subconsciously. Within the domain of Supreme Symphony's perception, an unprecedented cacophony of noises appeared. A huge, strange rhythm, like a choir suddenly inserted into the sound of the frozen city, and then quickly usurped the main position, eliminating all the noise. There was silence between heaven and earth. Only the last 2 sound sources were left. When Huaisher suddenly turned back and looked out of the window, he caught a glimpse of the huge figure that spread its wings from the ground and rose quickly, the praiser of the blessed land. And the praiser also looked at him. The pale face under the black robe showed an excited smile that belonged to a predator. When he waved his hand, there was a sound from the air that converged in one place and quickly converged. Then, a sound like a scream burst out from his fingertips toward Huaisher, like a giant cannon firing. It crossed a long distance in an instant and arrived in front of Huaisher. Huaisher drew his sword without hesitation and slashed. He felt the perceptual feedback from Supreme. It was completely different from his own symphony, but it seemed to be the same in a certain range. The nothingness and the emotions in it were given substance. The scream of despair collided with the blade of the sword of virtue, and sparks flew. Huaisher slid back a few meters. The illusion in front of him was finally defeated by the sudden and restless noise. The warmth, the incense, and even the elegant interior decoration disappeared without a trace, including the store manager. Only a skeleton covered in frost behind the long table was left in this dilapidated reception room. The store manager's brooch was pinned to the collar of the deceased, who had long passed away. A faint sigh of regret flashed in the wind. But Huaisher had no time to sigh. A whistling sound broke through the air. After the gray-black figure brazenly destroyed several floors, it fell from the sky and smashed in front of Huaisher. Under the hood, the pale face slowly raised, and the corners of the mouth stained with a trace of blood showed a hungry smile. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Huaisher." The praiser nodded and greeted. "To be honest, I've been looking forward to this meeting for a long time." "Well, after all, I'm very famous. It takes some time to make an appointment." Huaisher looked at the enemy in front of him, but he had no impression of him. He scratched his head in confusion. "Well, have we met before?" "Not really." The praiser shook his head and answered patiently. "You have always been unwilling to come to the headquarters of the Hell's Music Association. I have not had the chance to meet you because of work." As he spoke, he raised his hand and showed a scepter, symbol surrounded by notes. Huaisher suddenly understood. A calamity musician. "Ah, we're colleagues. Why didn't you say so earlier? You scared me to death." He patted his head, as if he had met an old friend in a foreign land, and warmly greeted him. "Where do you work?" "The land of bliss." The praiser replied, "I work as a performer in the choir. It's a good place. It has beautiful mountains and clear waters. And you work under the element of destruction. You have a bright future." Huaisher clapped his hands and praised, "Brother, you have such good conditions. Are you married?" "I've been widowed for a long time." The praiser sighed. "Although I have 2 children, neither of them inherited any talent. What a pity! children and grandchildren have their own fortune. There are so many good places in the land of bliss. What's a pity? Huaishur comforted him. Brother, you are young and promising. Just find a few more wives and have a few more children in the future. We'll talk about it when we have the chance. The praiser shook his head and sighed sadly. I took the liberty to visit you this time because I have a request for you. Well said, well said. Huaishur patted his chest loudly. We are all calamity musicians. There is no such thing as a request. Just say it. To be honest, over the years I have been concentrating on meditation and thinking hard to create a new movement for my Lord. Unfortunately, I encountered difficulties in the second movement and was stuck for a long time. That's why I came here specially. At that moment, a stench rushed over in the storm. The praiser grinned, revealing 4 sharp canine teeth. He no longer concealed the desire in his heart. Material. Waiting for him was the burning axe in Huaishur's hand. There was also a symphonic movement that, after accumulating power for a long time, made the entire frozen city sing. Concerto of 4 Seasons, Winter. Chapter 11:14. The sharp claws collided with the burning axe blade. A huge force burst out, and the entire building shook. Both sides couldn't help but take a step back. The impact from the axe blade and the turbulence of the source substance made Huaishur's vision go black. The axe of wrath, which had not undergone transformation, could not withstand the praiser's mutated claws. In other words, there were drops of black, viscous liquid dripping down from the pitch-black stave on the mutated claws. The eternal pain was like venom spreading along with it. But now, the claws that had been burned by wrath were quickly covered with a layer of white frost. Frozen! The praiser was stunned for a moment and looked at Huaishur. Under the young man's feet, layers of frost appeared and slowly spread in the performance formed by the cold wind and blizzard. With the understanding of Yun Zhongjuan's interference with the 4 seasons, the symphony performance had directly triggered the celestial phenomenon of Frozen City. This was the next level of Supreme after experiencing the advancement and the guidance of Shang Quan. No, even if peers are looking forward to death, it shouldn't be like this, right? Huaishur asked helplessly. Weren't we talking quite happily just now? Why did you turn hostile so suddenly? Oh, didn't you already agree? I have a request for material. The praiser licked the frost on his fingertips and savored the residual taste of the axe of wrath. He gradually became intoxicated. Why don't you fulfill my wish? I will definitely remember your generous sponsorship. In the reflection of those scarlet eyes, the young man in front of him surged with a bright light. That was countless sweet and wonderful inspirations flowing from the fresh soul. It was so appetizing. Drooling, please give me your charity, your excellency, Huaishur. He spread his arms, laughed, and pounced forward. Save me from my predicament. The sacred hymn emerged from the pitch-black staff wrapped around his body. Accompanied by his movements, countless high-pitched hisses and tragic roars converged into a melody playing the hymn of hell. He broke into Huaishur's melody so forcefully. It was as if he could hear the symphony praising the cold winter. He cut into the melody and interrupted Huaishur's rhythm, attacking step by step. Under the praiser's gray robe, countless piano keys appeared on his distorted body. They were controlled by invisible fingers and played the hymn of hell again. Wherever the pitch-black movement passed, countless faces appeared, wailing and singing miserably in the melody. The calamity of hell from the land of bliss condensed and took shape. Dozens of pitch-black claws emerged from under the gray robe like living creatures. They moved and retracted, changing constantly. The concrete walls and the solid ice that had been frozen for a long time were torn apart like thin paper. The building in front of him seemed to have become a toy in the hands of a child. But immediately after, the flames on the axe and the longsword smashed them one by one and cut them apart. Heaven and earth. From the fragmented melody, the grand chime sounded again. The frost wind roared, and the symphony sounded again. In an instant, he crossed a long distance. The contemptuous face flashed in front of him. The spear whistled, and after tearing the pitch-black claws, it left a hole in his chest. Then he closed his fingers and punched forward. Triple thunderbolt, collapse of the sky. In the loud roar, the praiser flew backward. The arms in front of his face burst into a mass of blood and quickly grew again. Then, the spreading stave was incinerated by the sword of virtue. What the hell? The praiser lost his voice. He couldn't understand. At this moment, under the restrictions of the environment, the strength of both sides could almost be said to be insignificant. What really determined the outcome was the attainments of the calamity musicians, the control of melody and music theory of both sides. But why was he the one who was suppressed? For hundreds of years, he had played and composed without sleep. After becoming a calamity musician, he had climbed and honed endlessly. He had even sacrificed everything to get to where he was today. In the end, his hymn of hell was suppressed by a junior who was less than a fraction of his age. He widened his eyes in disbelief. Boom! The scattered smoke and dust was torn apart, and the axe blade, wrapped in frost and flames, slashed down again. The chill and power from the entire frozen city was attached to it, and it easily broke through the praiser's defense, leaving a deep cut on his neck. Blood spurted out. He was almost beheaded in one blow. What made him even more uneasy was the sudden change in the melody and rhythm. Impossible! This is not classical music. The praiser roared and asked angrily, "What is this?" "Rock and roll. Haven't you heard of it?" Huaisher spread his hands and replied indifferently, "Who said that the cello can only be played in classical music? Times have changed. My friend, you have to rock and roll." "Crooked," the praiser roared. "Do you think you can beat me with such shallow things? This is just rock and roll. If you listen to heavy metal, won't your whole family explode with anger?" Huaisher shook his head. "Come on, my friend, don't make excuses." The spear of compassion rushed forward and pierced through bit by bit. Under the influence of the flowing water, the hymn from hell was completely torn apart. The vicious poison spread in the wounds, and strange flowers grew from the hymn's body one after another. Under Huaisher's throw, the spear pierced through the praiser's body, pulled him backward, and nailed him to the collapsed wall. "If I were you, I would reflect on it." Huaisher raised his hand indifferently, wiped the blood off his face, and asked mockingly, "You can't beat others. Is it because, well, your professional level is not very good?" The praiser stiffened. "With this level of skill, why are you a disaster musician?" He spread his hands and sincerely suggested, "Why don't you consider changing your profession, saving the blessed land, and becoming an idol?" At that moment, the praiser's pupils almost shrank to the size of a needle tip. The pale face turned red, green, and black in unprecedented humiliation, and even twitched ferociously. It was hard to imagine that a person's facial features could be twisted into such an indescribable appearance. In the end, the pair of widened eyes actually exploded under the torment of the invisible flames of anger. Blood that was as thick as mud spurted out from it. What followed was a scream that caused the entire frozen city to tremble. Countless icicles shattered and fell. The walls and the ground trembled, and cracks appeared. The praiser's body swelled rapidly and was torn apart from the inside out. It was like an old robe being shed. A pair of hands stretched out from the cracked chest, followed by a naked body. A pair of glorious wings spread out from his back, and a solemn halo appeared above his head. It was as if an angel had descended to the mortal world, under the power of Gaia's blood. He finally recovered his former state in the blessed land. In fact, it went one step further. Countless movements of the abyss wrapped around his body. Hatred, greed, desire, and all kinds of different meanings flowed out from them. He completely gave up the duel between the disaster musicians and the attainments of music that he was proud of. He wanted to use his strongest power to blast the damn guy in front of him into pieces. In the oncoming hurricane, Huaishir was already stunned. What the hell? Didn't we agree to compete on the same stage? Everyone was playing well. So why did you change your mind and flip the table? He was anxious. But the problem was he seemed to be anxious too. I feel it. The praiser raised his face, and his 6 eyes stared at the opponent in front of him. A steady stream of inspiration is in your blood. Thanks to you, Mr. Huaishir, I finally understood. Then shouldn't you thank me properly? Huaishir took small steps back without leaving a trace and politely waved his hand. Forget about kowtowing and acknowledging me as your teacher. When there's a chance later, let's set up 2 tables and have some fun together. I will. The praiser raised his finger and grinned. After composing a new melody with your bones and blood, boom, the sound waves that were given substance suddenly burst out and formed dark claws without warning, grabbing at Huaishir's face. In an instant, Huaishir's raised axe blade was sent flying, and together with him, they smashed into the building that was riddled with holes. In the roar, Huaishir smashed through several walls in a row and fell into the presidential suite that was already covered in dust. 2 skeletons hugging each other fell from the sofa that was smashed by Huaishir, fell to the ground, and weathered into ashes. Sorry to disturb you. Huaishir got up in a sorry state. Before he could help collect the remains, he felt a low wind pressure above his head. The strange giant claw condensed again in the praising him. After tearing through layers of floors, it slammed down on Huaishir, not caring about the small wounds left by the spear, and smashed him into the floor. In the continuous collapse, Huaishir penetrated through layers of floors and fell into the banquet hall. In a moment of trance, he seemed to have fallen into an illusion once again. In the warm wind and incense, in the rearranged banquet hall, the people in ragged clothes shared the last of the food and wine. Everyone held hands in a simple performance, regardless of status. They danced happily, smiled, and sang in unison. There was no pain or sorrow. That was the scene before the destruction. But soon, the illusion disappeared again. Only the broken banquet hall was left. Dust fluttered and froze into frost. A pair of leather shoes stopped at Huaishir's feet. Have you thought it through, Mr. Huaishir? The store manager's illusion looked at the customer's sorry state and smiled awkwardly, but politely. It seems that time waits for no one here. Yes, I've thought it through. Huaishir nodded frantically, but before he could finish, the giant claw condensed in the void picked him up again, clenched him tightly, and smashed him into the floor, falling into the messy hall. He raised a hand and rolled with all his might, avoiding the attack that was enough to completely crush him into meat paste. He panted in a sorry state. In the flying dust, the store manager's illusion reappeared and pointed at the elevator behind Huaishir. Huaishir turned around without thinking, ran with all his strength, smashed the broken iron door in front of him, and fell into the deep elevator shaft. Where are you going? Huaishir. The praising him smashed through layers of walls and laughed shrilly. The illusion can't save you. The huge sharp claws appeared again, completely tearing the building in front of him apart. Everything was torn apart inch by inch and crushed into dust, leaving no opportunity for him to take advantage of. together with those illusions. The store manager shrugged indifferently and watched Huaishi's disappearing back. He allowed his last remnant to be torn apart by the sharp claws and disappear. Only the rusted collar pin fell from the dissipating illusion. Amidst the fine sounds of collisions, the last glow appeared. It was the emblem from the Astronomy Society before the long, long destruction. When the world was destroyed, the earth fell apart, and everything was shrouded in endless cold. Only the last mission was transmitted in the eternal illusion, to send this remnant of the past to the hands of the future successor. At this moment, in the dark fall, the bright glow appeared in front of Huaishi again, bringing the gift from a long time ago. Huaishi, the departed soul asked softly, "What do you want?" Huaishi reached out and held the beam of light tightly. At that moment, the last obstacle was torn apart by countless giant claws, and the ferocious face of the praising him appeared from behind the crack. Seeing the magnificent color of Gaia's blood, he froze for a moment, unable to hide his fear. But when the light dissipated, Huaishi only had a broken book in his hand. Other than that, there was no change. "What is that?" The praising him sneered. "Your savior? A broken book." He waved his hand, and the music of the abyss played again. Dozens of giant claws appeared out of thin air and attacked without hesitation. At that moment, an illusory voice sounded in his ears. It was a soft chant from Huaishi. It was hoarse and low. "Look, my friend Sancho Panza, there are more than 30 extraordinarily large giants over there." As a result, the title of the book quietly appeared on the cover of the faded and mottled book in his hand. Don Quixote. At that moment, the ancient record of events quietly collapsed. Countless light spots flew out from it and condensed into the outline of a card. Like an angry dragon, the lightning shot up to the sky from the face of the card, whipping the heavens and the earth, sweeping away all the demons and monsters. The thunder spread and completely defeated the hymns and praises of hell. In the end, a skinny figure walked out of the void. Every time I open my eyes, I can see new trash. Under the entanglement of the lightning, the middle-aged man with long white hair looked back and asked coldly, "Kid, don't you have any respect for your seniors?" "Oh, look at what you're saying." Huaishi shrugged and blinked shyly. "Isn't it a good tradition of our celestial genealogy to call people over?" Dead silence. A long dead silence. Not only the praising him, but at that moment, all the participants who saw the endless lightning, the players outside the battlefield, and the bystanders in the Hell Palace, and the governing board fell into a sudden daze. In the dead silence, only the corners of Russell's mouth curled up into a happy smile. Do you finally understand? Huaishi, with Gaia's blood as the source, using the records in the Book of Destiny to reproduce and recreate, using the rules created by both sides in this bet, and thus crossing the limits of time and life and death, this is the golden finger that only belongs to you in this game. 70 years ago, the Utopia card set that resounded throughout hell, Thunder of the Four Seas, Ing Fong Zhou. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.